there, dear listeners. Welcome back to our podcast, powered by the amazing team at Jetoff. I'm Mira, and I'm super to be here with my co-host, Leo. We've got a fantastic episode for you today.
Thanks. Mira, I'm Leo, and I'm thrilled to be back with you. We've had an incredible journey so far, and today we're going to dive into the wonderful world of Seychelles and Switzerland.
Oh, yes. These two countries are quite the opposites, but in the best possible way. I mean, who wouldn't want to trade in their winter boots for a pair of flip-flops and soak up the sun in Seychelles?
Well, not me. Mira, I'm more of a mountain man. Give me the Swiss Alps any day, and I'll be in heaven. But I have to admit, Seychelles does have some amazing beaches. Maybe I'll have to trade in my hiking boots for a pair of sunglasses. Oh.
I'm sure you'll fit right in with the beach bums, Leo. But let's get serious for a moment. We've had a few interesting situations between our last podcast and this one. Have you heard about the Great Coffee Machine incident?
Oh, you mean when I accidentally spilled coffee all over my shirt and had to do an emergency laundry cycle? Yeah, that was a close call.
Exactly. And the best part is, I was the one who had to help you clean up the mess. I mean, I'm a bit of a mess myself, but I try to help others clean up theirs.
Well, I appreciate your help, Mira, but I think I've got it under control now. After all, I've been practicing my coffee-making skills. Or should I say, my coffee-spilling skills?
Well, I'm sure our listeners would love to see a video of that. Maybe we can even do a coffee spill challenge in our next episode.
Sounds like a plan to me. Mira? But, for now, let's focus on today's topic, a detailed comparison of Seychelles and Switzerland. We'll be answering all the questions in your mind, from what's the best time to visit, to how do I navigate the local culture.
That's right. Leo. And for all our listeners who are considering moving, living, or even marrying someone from one of these countries, we got you covered. This podcast will be your comprehensive guide to help you make informed decisions.
Exactly. And, as always, we'll be bringing you the inside scoop, the pros and cons, and all the fun facts you need to know. So, grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let's dive into the wonderful world of Seychelles and Switzerland.
So, let's dive into the general safety and crime rates in Seychelles and Switzerland. I'm curious to see how these two countries compare.
Ah, great topic. I've always wondered how Seychelles, with its stunning beaches and crystal clear waters, stacks up against Switzerland's picturesque mountains and efficient infrastructure.
Well, Seychelles has a relatively low crime rate compared to other countries in Africa. But I've heard that petty theft and burglary can be a problem in some areas, especially in the capital city of Victoria.
That's true. But Switzerland has a reputation for being one of the safest countries in the world, with its strict gun laws and low crime rates. It's no wonder that tourists flock to visit the Swiss Alps.
I'm sure our listeners would agree that safety is a top priority when traveling. And I'm curious to know, Leo, have you ever had any close calls while traveling in Switzerland?
Well, I once got lost in the streets of Zurich, but that's about it. I managed to find my way back to my hotel with the help of a friendly local.
I'm sure that was a relief. But, in all seriousness, both Seychelles and Switzerland have a strong police presence, which helps to deter crime. And, in Seychelles, the government has implemented various initiatives to reduce crime and improve public safety.
That's great to hear. And, in Switzerland, the emphasis on community policing and neighborhood watch programs has also contributed to the country's low crime rate.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that community policing is an effective way to reduce crime?
Well, I think it's a great way to build trust between law enforcement and the community. But I also think that it's essential to address the root causes of crime, such as poverty and inequality.
Absolutely. And in Seychelles, The government has implemented various social programs to address poverty and inequality, but I've heard that the country still faces challenges in terms of corruption and organized crime.
That's a great point. Mira, corruption and organized crime can be major obstacles to reducing crime rates. But I think that both Seychelles and Switzerland have made significant progress in recent years.
I'm glad to hear that, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that it's essential to stay informed about the latest crime statistics and trends in both countries.
Well, I think that's a great topic for our next podcast. But for now, let's just say that Seychelles and Switzerland are both safe destinations for tourists and travelers.
I think we can all agree on that. And if you have any thoughts or questions about this topic, please let us know in the comments.
And if you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments too.
Well, it looks like we've reached the end of our discussion on general safety and crime rates in Seychelles and Switzerland. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more exciting topics and discussions.
Let's dive into the fascinating world of Seychelles and Switzerland, where governance and community relations shape expat life. Political stability and social harmony are essential for any country to thrive. Seychelles, an archipelago off the coast of East Africa, boasts a relatively stable government, with President Wavell Ramkala at the helm. He's made significant strides in promoting peace and unity within the country.
I'm impressed by Seychelles' commitment to democracy and human rights. Their constitution guarantees freedom of speech, assembly, and the press, which is a hallmark of a stable society. On the other hand, Switzerland's federal system has been a cornerstone of its stability for centuries. The country's unique blend of direct democracy and representative government ensures that power is distributed fairly among its citizens.
That's an excellent point. Leo, Switzerland's system of direct democracy allows citizens to participate in decision-making processes through referendums and initiatives. This approach has contributed to the country's high level of social cohesion and trust in institutions. In contrast, Seychelles has faced challenges in maintaining a stable government, with several coups and power struggles in the past.
However, Seychelles has made significant progress in recent years, with a renewed focus on democracy and good governance. The country has also implemented various initiatives to promote social harmony, such as the National Unity and Reconciliation Commission. This commission aims to promote reconciliation and healing among different communities in Seychelles.
I'm curious to know how our listeners living in Seychelles and Switzerland would agree with me on the importance of social harmony in these countries. Do you think that social harmony is more challenging to maintain in Seychelles due to its history of power struggles and coups? Or do you think that Switzerland's direct democracy system is more conducive to social harmony?
Great question. Mira, I think that both countries face unique challenges in maintaining social harmony. However, I believe that Switzerland's direct democracy system has contributed to a higher level of social cohesion and trust in institutions. In Seychelles, the government's efforts to promote national unity and reconciliation are commendable. But more work needs to be done to address the historical grievances of certain communities.
That's a fair point. Leo, it's essential to acknowledge the complexities of social harmony in both countries. In Seychelles, for example, there are still tensions between the Creole and African communities, which were exacerbated by the country's colonial past. Switzerland, on the other hand, has a more homogeneous population, which has contributed to its high level of social cohesion.
However, Switzerland's homogeneity has also been criticized for being too narrow-minded. The country has struggled with integrating migrants and refugees, which has led to social tensions in certain areas. In contrast, Seychelles has made significant progress in promoting diversity and inclusion, with a growing Creole and African population.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that Seychelles' efforts to promote diversity and inclusion are more effective than Switzerland's approach to integrating migrants and refugees? Or do you think that both countries have their strengths and weaknesses in this regard?
Great question. Mira, I think that both countries face unique challenges in promoting diversity and inclusion. However, I believe that Seychelles' commitment to promoting Creole culture and language has contributed to a greater sense of national identity and belonging among its citizens.
That's an excellent point. Leo, Seychelles' efforts to promote Creole culture and language are indeed commendable. For more insights like this, don't forget to check out Jizzolf AI, where you can explore more articles and podcasts on Nightlife and global issues.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more in-depth discussions on topics like this.
So, let's dive into the economic conditions and cost of living in Seychelles and Switzerland. Both countries have their own unique financial realities that can affect expats' lives.
That's right. Vera, Seychelles, for instance, has a relatively high cost of living due to its remote island location and limited economic opportunities.
Yes, and it's not just the cost of living that's a challenge. Seychelles also has a relatively small job market, which can make it difficult for expats to find employment.
But, on the other hand, Switzerland is known for its strong economy and high standard of living. The country has a highly developed financial sector and a strong job market.
Exactly, Leo. And it's not just the economy that's attractive in Switzerland. The country also has a low cost of living compared to other Western European countries.
That's right. And, as a bonus, Switzerland has a highly developed public transportation system, making it easy to get around without a car.
I'm certain that all those living in Switzerland would agree with me that the public transportation system is one of the country's greatest assets.
Well, I'm sure they would. But, in all seriousness, Switzerland's strong economy and high standard of living make it an attractive destination for expats.
And, on the other hand, Seychelles has a more laid-back and relaxed atmosphere, which can be appealing to those looking for a slower pace of life.
That's true. Mira. And, while Seychelles may not have the same level of economic opportunities as Switzerland, it's still a beautiful and unique destination.
I think our listeners would agree that both countries have their own unique charms and attractions.
Absolutely. And, who knows? Maybe one day we'll have a special episode all about Seychelles and Switzerland's economic conditions and cost of living.
Well, that's a great idea. Leo, maybe we can even have a special segment on the pros and cons of living in each country.
Sounds like a plan to me. And, in the meantime, let's continue to explore the economic conditions and cost of living in Seychelles and Switzerland.
So, let's talk more about the job market in Seychelles. What can you tell us about the types of jobs available and the average salaries?
Well, Mira, the job market in Seychelles is relatively small, but there are opportunities available in the tourism and hospitality industries.
That's right. And I think our listeners would be interested to know that Seychelles also has a growing expat community, with many foreigners working in the tourism and hospitality sectors.
And I'm sure they would be to know that the average salary in Seychelles is relatively low compared to other Western European countries.
Well, yes, that's true. But, on the other hand, the cost of living in Seychelles is also relatively low, which can make it easier for expats to afford the local lifestyle.
That's a good point, Mira. And let's not forget that Seychelles also has a stunning natural beauty and a rich cultural heritage.
Exactly. And I think our listeners would agree that Seychelles is a unique and beautiful destination that's definitely worth visiting.
And, who knows, maybe one day we'll have a special episode all about the natural beauty and cultural heritage of Seychelles.
Well, that's a great idea. Leo, maybe we can even have a special segment on the best places to visit and experience in Seychelles.
Sounds like a plan to me. And, in the meantime, let's continue to explore the economic conditions and cost of living in Seychelles and Switzerland.
So, let's talk more about the cost of living in Switzerland. What can you tell us about the average prices of food and transportation?
Well, Mira, the cost of living in Switzerland is generally high, especially in cities like Zurich and Geneva.
That's right. Leo, and I think our listeners would be interested to know that Switzerland also has a high standard of living, with access to quality healthcare and education.
And I'm sure they would be to know that the average salary in Switzerland is relatively high compared to other Western European countries.
Well, yes, that's true. But, on the other hand, the cost of living in Switzerland can be quite high, especially for expats who are not used to the local prices.
That's a good point. Mira, and let's not forget that Switzerland also has a highly developed public transportation system, making it easy to get around without a car.
Exactly. Leo. And I think our listeners would agree that Switzerland's public transportation system is one of the country's greatest assets.
Well, I'm sure they would. But, in all seriousness, Switzerland's strong economy and high standard of living make it an attractive destination for expats.
And, on the other hand, Seychelles has a more laid-back and relaxed atmosphere, which can be appealing to those looking for a slower pace of life.
That's true. Mira, and, while Seychelles may not have the same level of economic opportunities as Switzerland, it's still a beautiful and unique destination.
I think our listeners would agree that both countries have their own unique charms and attractions.
Absolutely. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll have a special episode all about Seychelles and Switzerland's economic conditions and cost of living.
Well, that's a great idea. Leo, maybe we can even have a special segment on the pros and cons of living in each country.
Sounds like a plan to me.
I'm fascinated by Seychelles' unique blend of African, European, and Asian influences, which is reflected in its architecture, and even its accommodation options.
Ah, yes. The Seychelles housing market is a fascinating topic, and I'm to dive into it. From luxury villas to affordable guest houses, the options are vast and varied.
And I think what's unique about Seychelles is that it offers a range of accommodation types. From budget-friendly options like guest houses and hostels to luxury resorts and villas.
That's right. Mia, and what's interesting is that many of these luxury resorts and villas are designed to mimic the traditional Creole-style architecture, which adds to the island's charm.
I'm certain that our listeners living in this country would agree with me that the Seychelles housing market is quite vibrant and diverse.
I think that's an understatement. Mira, but seriously, the Seychelles housing market is a great example of how a small island nation can offer a wide range of accommodation options to suit different budgets and preferences.
Now, let's compare this to Switzerland, which is known for its high standard of living and excellent infrastructure.
Ah, yes. Switzerland is definitely a country that values quality and luxury, and its accommodation options reflect this.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that Switzerland's high standard of living and excellent infrastructure come at a cost when it comes to accommodation options?
Well, I think that's a great point. Mira, Switzerland does come at a higher price point than Seychelles, but the quality and luxury that comes with it is definitely worth it for many people.
And what about the types of accommodation available in Switzerland? Do you think they offer a similar range of options as Seychelles?
I think Switzerland has a slightly more limited range of accommodation options, but they're still very high quality and luxurious.
I see. Well, let's talk about the pros and cons of each country's accommodation options. In Seychelles, what are some of the advantages of choosing a guest house or hostel over a luxury resort?
Well, for one, guest houses and hostels are often much more affordable than luxury resorts, and they offer a more authentic and local experience.
That's a great point. Leo, and what about the disadvantages of choosing a guest house or hostel in Seychelles?
Well, I think one of the downsides is that they may not offer the same level of luxury and amenities as a luxury resort.
I agree. And what about Switzerland? What are some of the advantages of choosing a luxury hotel or resort over a budget-friendly option?
Well, for one, luxury hotels and resorts in Switzerland offer a very high standard of living and excellent amenities, such as spas and fine dining restaurants.
That sounds amazing. And what about the disadvantages of choosing a luxury hotel or resort in Switzerland?
Well, I think one of the downsides is that they can be very expensive, and the prices may be out of reach for many people.
I see. Well, let's talk about the importance of location when it comes to accommodation options in both countries. In Seychelles, what are some of the most popular locations for tourists and expats?
Well, some of the most popular locations in Seychelles include Maui, Crestlet, and Lodi, which offer stunning beaches and a range of accommodation options.
That's right. Leah. And what about Switzerland? What are some of the most popular locations for tourists and expats?
Well, some of the most popular locations in Switzerland include Zurich, Geneva, and Bern, which offer a range of accommodation options and excellent infrastructure.
I'm certain that our listeners would agree with me that location is a crucial factor when it comes to choosing accommodation in both countries.
I think that's a given. Mira. But seriously, location is a key factor in choosing accommodation, and both Seychelles and Switzerland offer a range of great locations to choose from.
And finally, let's talk about the importance of research and planning when it comes to finding the right accommodation in both countries.
Well, I think research and planning are essential when it comes to finding the right accommodation in both Seychelles and Switzerland.
That's right. Leah. And what's interesting is that both countries offer a range of online resources and tools to help with research and planning.
That's true. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on sustainability and eco-friendliness when it comes to accommodation options.
That's a great point. Leo. And I think it's something that our listeners should definitely consider when choosing accommodation in both countries.
Absolutely. Well, that's all for this criteria. Mira, I think we've covered a lot of ground and provided some valuable insights for our listeners.
I agree. Leo. And I think our listeners will appreciate the comparison between Seychelles and Switzerland's accommodation options and quality.
I'm sure they will. Mira, and if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media for more content like this.
That's right, Mira. And thank you to our listeners for joining us on this criterion. We'll see you in the next one.
Dive into the world of visa and immigration procedures in Seychelles and Switzerland. I'm sure many of our listeners have wondered how easy or difficult it is to navigate these processes. As we compare these two countries, I think it's safe to say that both have their own unique approaches.
That's right. Mira, while Seychelles has a relatively straightforward process, Switzerland's bureaucracy can be a bit more complex. But don't worry, we'll break it down for you.
I love how you always start with a reassuring tone. Leah. Now, let's talk about Seychelles. From what I understand, their visa policy is quite flexible. You can apply for a visa on arrival, and the process is usually pretty smooth.
Exactly. And the best part is that Seychelles has a visa on arrival policy, which means you can get your visa at the airport. It's a great option for tourists and expats alike.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure many of our listeners who have visited Seychelles would agree that the island's beauty and charm make it a wonderful destination. But let's get back to the topic at hand.
Right. So, in Switzerland, the process is a bit more involved. You'll need to apply for a visa in advance, and the requirements can be a bit more stringent. But don't worry, we'll walk you through it.
I'm sure our listeners who have dealt with Swiss bureaucracy would agree that it can be a bit challenging. But I'm curious. Leo, have you ever had to navigate the Swiss visa process yourself?
Well, let's just say I've had my fair share of experience with Swiss bureaucracy. But in all seriousness, it's not impossible. You just need to know the right steps to take.
I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your experiences. Leo. But for now, let's focus on the visa process.
Right. So in Switzerland, you'll need to apply for a visa through the Swiss embassy or consulate. And the requirements can vary depending on your nationality and the purpose of your stay.
That's right. And I think it's worth noting that Switzerland has a reputation for being a bit more strict when it comes to immigration policies.
That's true. But it's not all bad news. Switzerland has a lot to offer, from its stunning natural beauty to its vibrant cultural scene.
And I'm sure our listeners would agree that Switzerland is a wonderful destination. But let's get back to the visa process.
Right? So once you've applied for your visa, you'll need to wait for it to be processed. And this can take anywhere from a few days to several weeks.
Ah, I see. And what about the cost of the visa? I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about that.
Good question. The cost of the visa can vary depending on your nationality and the purpose of your stay. But generally speaking, it's around $50 to $100.
That's not too bad. And I think it's worth noting that Seychelles has a more affordable visa process.
That's true. But Switzerland has a lot to offer. And the cost of the visa is just one factor to consider.
I'm sure our listeners would agree that both countries have their own unique charms. But let's get back to the visa process.
Right. So in conclusion, both Seychelles and Switzerland have their own unique approaches to visa and immigration procedures. While Seychelles has a more straightforward process, Switzerland's bureaucracy can be a bit more complex.
But that's all part of the adventure. Right. Leo? And I'm sure our listeners would agree that navigating the visa process is just part of the journey.
Absolutely. Mira. And I'm sure our listeners would love to share their own experiences with visa and immigration procedures in the comments below.
That's a great idea. Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your experiences navigating Swiss bureaucracy.
Well, maybe next time. Mira. For now, let's just say that I've learned a thing or two about navigating the Swiss visa process.
I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about that. Leo. But for now, let's just say that both Seychelles and Switzerland have their own unique charms.
Absolutely. Mira. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that both countries have a lot to offer.
And this topic. Folks, we hope you found this information helpful. And we'd love to hear more about your experiences with visa and immigration procedures in the comments below.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more informative content like this. We'll see you in the next episode.
And don't forget to share your thoughts with us in the comments below. We'd love to hear more about your experiences with visa and immigration procedures in Seychelles and Switzerland. So, let's dive into the world of health services. Comparing Seychelles and Switzerland. Both countries boast excellent medical facilities. But I'm curious, Leo, have you ever tried navigating the healthcare system in Seychelles?
Well, I'm a bit of a health enthusiast, but I must admit, I've never had to deal with Seychelles' healthcare system firsthand. But I've heard it's quite good, especially for expats who can afford the private sector.
Exactly. And speaking of expats, I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree that the private sector is indeed a popular choice for foreigners. But let's talk about the public system. From what I researched, Seychelles has a relatively small population, which makes it easier for the government to provide quality care to everyone.
That's true. Seychelles has a well-organized public healthcare system, with a focus on preventative care and community-based services. But I'm curious, Mira, how does Switzerland compare in terms of access to healthcare? I mean, we all know about their high-quality hospitals and medical facilities.
Yes. Switzerland is renowned for its top-notch medical care. And it's not just about the quality of hospitals. Their healthcare system is designed to be patient-centered, with a focus on individualized care and prevention. And did you know that Switzerland has a unique system where patients can choose their own doctors and hospitals?
Well, that's amazing. I didn't know that. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about this. But let's not forget about Seychelles. From what I've heard, their healthcare system is also quite patient-centered, with a focus on community-based care.
Exactly. And, in fact, Seychelles has a unique approach to healthcare, where patients are encouraged to take an active role in their own care. It's all about empowerment and self-care. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about this approach.
I'm sure they would. And I'm curious. Mira, how does Switzerland's healthcare system compare to Seychelles in terms of cost? I mean, we all know that healthcare can be expensive, especially in Switzerland.
Ah, yes. Switzerland is indeed one of the most expensive countries in terms of healthcare. But what's interesting is that Seychelles has a relatively low cost of living, which makes their healthcare system more accessible to everyone.
That's true. Seychelles has a lower cost of living, which makes it easier for people to access healthcare without breaking the bank. But I'm curious, Mira, how does Switzerland's healthcare system compare to Seychelles in terms of language barriers? I mean, we all know that language can be a barrier to healthcare, especially for expats.
Ah, yes. Language can indeed be a barrier to healthcare. But in Switzerland, many medical professionals speak multiple languages, including English, and in Seychelles, Creole is the official language, but many medical professionals also speak English.
That's great to hear. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about this. But let's not forget about the cultural nuances of healthcare in each country. From what I've heard, Seychelles has a strong emphasis on traditional medicine and holistic approaches to healthcare.
Exactly. And, in fact, Seychelles has a unique approach to healthcare that combines traditional medicine with modern Western medicine. It's all about finding a balance between the two. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about this approach.
I'm sure they would. And I'm curious. Mira, how does Switzerland's healthcare system compare to Seychelles in terms of patient satisfaction? I mean, we all know that patient satisfaction is crucial in any healthcare system.
Yes. Patient satisfaction is indeed crucial. And in Switzerland, patients are generally very satisfied with their care. And in Seychelles, patients also report high levels of satisfaction with their care, especially in the private sector.
That's great to hear. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about this. But let's not forget about the future of healthcare in each country. From what I've heard, Seychelles is investing heavily in digital healthcare and telemedicine.
Exactly. And, in fact, Seychelles is one of the first countries in the region to adopt digital healthcare and telemedicine. It's all about using technology to improve access to healthcare and reduce costs.
That's amazing. And I'm curious. Mira, how does Switzerland's healthcare system compare to Seychelles in terms of innovation and technology? I mean, we all know that innovation is crucial in healthcare.
Yes. Innovation is indeed crucial. And in Switzerland, medical professionals are constantly looking for new ways to improve healthcare and reduce costs. And in Seychelles, innovation is also a key priority, especially in the area of digital healthcare.
That's great to hear. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about this. But let's not forget about the importance of healthcare in each country. From what I've heard, healthcare is a top priority in both Seychelles and Switzerland.
Exactly. And, in fact, healthcare is a top priority in both countries, with a strong emphasis on prevention and patient-centered care. It's all about putting patients first and providing high-quality care.
I'm sure our listeners would agree with that. And I'm curious. Mira, what do you think is the most important thing for our listeners to know about the healthcare systems in Seychelles and Switzerland?
Yes. I think the most important thing for our listeners to know is that both countries have excellent healthcare systems, with a focus on patient-centered care and prevention. And in Seychelles, the emphasis on traditional medicine and holistic approaches to healthcare is unique and worth exploring.
That's a great point, Mira. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about this. Well, that's all for now. Folks, thanks for tuning into our podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic.
dive into transportation, infrastructure, and convenience in Seychelles and Switzerland. I bet our listeners in Seychelles are nodding along. Finally, someone's talking about our public transit woes.
Ah, I can feel the empathy. Both countries have their unique challenges. In Seychelles, for instance, you have the beautiful islands, but the transportation network is quite limited. It's all about relying on ferries and boats to get around.
That's true. Leo, but what about the roads? I've heard Seychelles has some of the best roads in Africa, which is impressive considering the island's size.
Yes, that's correct. The roads are well maintained, but the traffic can be a nightmare, especially during peak season. It's like a game of bumper cars on the roads.
I can imagine. And what about Switzerland? I've heard their public transit system is top-notch.
Absolutely. Switzerland has one of the most efficient public transit systems in the world. Their trains are on time, and the buses are reliable. It's a dream come true for commuters.
That's amazing. I bet our listeners in Switzerland are smiling. This is our life, not the chaotic traffic in Seychelles.
Yes, it's a different story altogether. But, Mira, have you ever tried to drive in Switzerland? It's like a puzzle trying to navigate the roads with all the roundabouts and narrow lanes.
Oh, I can only imagine. But seriously, Leo, what about bike-friendly infrastructure in Seychelles? I've heard it's a bit limited.
That's true. Seychelles is still developing its bike-friendly infrastructure, but there are some great initiatives underway to make cycling more accessible.
I see. And in Switzerland, I've heard the bike lanes are extensive. Do you think that's a key factor in their transportation success?
Absolutely. Switzerland's bike-friendly infrastructure is one of the reasons why their transportation system is so efficient. It's all about providing options for commuters.
I bet our listeners are. Why can't our country have bike-friendly infrastructure like Switzerland?
Well, it's not impossible. Seychelles can learn from Switzerland's example and develop its own bike-friendly infrastructure.
That's a great point. And what about the impact of tourism on transportation in Seychelles? I've heard it's a major challenge.
Yes, tourism can put a strain on the transportation system, especially during peak season. But Seychelles is working to develop more sustainable tourism practices that take into account the impact on the environment and the local community.
I see. And in Switzerland, I've heard the tourism industry is also a major contributor to the transportation system. But how does it compare to Seychelles?
Well, Switzerland has a more developed tourism industry, and it's a major contributor to the country's economy. But the tourism industry in Switzerland is also more sustainable, with a focus on eco-tourism and reducing the impact on the environment.
That's interesting. I bet our listeners are. How can we make our tourism industry more sustainable like Switzerland?
Well, it's all about providing options for tourists and locals alike. And Seychelles can learn from Switzerland's example and develop its own sustainable tourism practices.
That's a great point. And finally, what about the role of technology and transportation in both countries? I've heard it's playing a big role.
Yes, technology is playing a huge role in transportation in both countries. In Seychelles, there are initiatives underway to develop a more efficient public transit system using technology. And in Switzerland, the transportation system is already quite efficient, but technology is being used to make it even more efficient.
I see. And what about our listeners? Do you have any tips for navigating public transit in Seychelles or Switzerland? Share your experiences in the comments below.
I think we've covered a lot of ground. Mira, but it's always great to hear from our listeners and learn from their experiences.
Absolutely. Leo. And that's all for this criterion. Thanks for chatting with me about transportation, infrastructure, and convenience in Seychelles and Switzerland. Hey, guys. Let's talk about language barriers and ease of communication in Seychelles and Switzerland. I'm sure many of you who live in these countries can relate to the unique challenges and benefits of navigating different languages.
Language barriers, the ultimate comedy goldmine. I mean, who doesn't love a good miscommunication? But seriously, Seychelles is an archipelago with 12 languages spoken, including Creole, French, English, and others.
Wow, that's a lot of languages. I'm sure it can be confusing for tourists and expats alike. But what's interesting is that Seychelles has a strong tradition of multilinguals, and many people speak multiple languages fluently.
That's right. And it's actually a major advantage for Seychelles. With so many languages spoken, it's easier for tourists to communicate and get around. Plus, it's a great way to learn about different cultures and languages.
Absolutely. In Switzerland, on the other hand, has for official languages German, French, Italian, and Romance. But despite the language diversity, Switzerland has a highly developed system of translation and interpretation services.
Ah, yes. The Swiss are known for their love of order and efficiency. And speaking of order, have you ever tried to navigate a Swiss train station? It's like a well-oiled machine, but with a lot more German and French thrown in.
Yes, it can be a challenge, but the Swiss are actually very helpful and accommodating when it comes to language. And many Swiss people speak multiple languages fluently, especially in tourist areas.
That's true. And it's worth noting that Switzerland has a strong tradition of neutrality, which means that many people speak multiple languages as a way of communicating with people from different countries.
I see what you mean. And it's interesting that both Seychelles and Switzerland have a strong sense of cultural identity despite their language diversity. In Seychelles, for example, the Creole language is an important part of the country's history and culture.
Ah, yes. And in Switzerland, the different languages and cultures are all part of the country's rich heritage. And it's great to see how expats and tourists can immerse themselves in these cultures and languages.
Absolutely. And I'm sure many of you have had experiences with language barriers in both Seychelles and Switzerland. What do you think is the biggest challenge when it comes to communication in these countries?
Well, I think it's definitely a challenge for tourists and expats who don't speak the local language fluently. But at the same time, it's also a great opportunity to learn and grow as a person.
That's so true. And I'm curious, Leo, have you ever had any humorous experiences with language barriers in Seychelles or Switzerland?
Ah, yes. There was one time when I tried to order coffee in Creole and ended up getting a very creative response from the barista. Let's just say it was a funny moment, but also a great learning experience.
Oh, that sounds hilarious. And I'm sure many of our listeners can relate to that kind of experience. Thanks for sharing. Leo!
No problem. Happy to share.
And if you have any stories or tips about navigating language barriers in Seychelles or Switzerland, please share them with us in the comments below.
Absolutely. And let's keep the conversation going.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.
And don't forget to like and subscribe for more fun and informative content.
I'm curious. Leo, have you ever been to Seychelles? Those islands are just stunning, aren't they?
Ah, yes. I've been. And I must say, the diversity is incredible. From Creole to French, English, and even some African languages. It's a true melting pot.
Exactly. And you can feel the harmony in the air. I mean, who wouldn't love a place where people from all over the world come together and celebrate their differences?
That's right. And it's not just about the languages. The cuisine is also a wonderful reflection of the country's cultural diversity. You've got your Seychelles Creole, French, and Indian influences all mixed together.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me that the food is amazing. And I'm curious, have you tried any of the local dishes?
Oh, yes, I have. And they're incredible. But I think what's even more impressive is the way the Seychelles people have managed to preserve their cultural heritage while still embracing modernity.
Absolutely. And speaking of cultural heritage, have you heard about the Seychelles National Cultural Festival? It's a wonderful celebration of the country's music, dance, and art.
Yes, I've heard of it, and I'm actually planning to attend the next one. It's a great way to experience the country's rich cultural diversity firsthand.
That sounds like a fantastic idea. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments below.
I'm sure they won't. Mira, but seriously, the Seychelles National Cultural Festival is a must-attend event for anyone interested in cultural diversity and tolerance.
Well, moving on to Switzerland, I think it's interesting to note that the country has a very different approach to cultural diversity. While Seychelles celebrates its differences, Switzerland is more focused on promoting unity and cohesion.
Yes, that's true. But I think what's often overlooked is the fact that Switzerland has a long history of cultural diversity, dating back to the Middle Ages.
That's right. And it's fascinating to see how the country has managed to balance its different cultures and languages. I mean, you've got German, Italian, and Roman all coexisting in the same country.
Exactly. And it's not just about the languages. The cuisine is also a wonderful reflection of the country's cultural diversity. You've got your fondue, raclette, and day el Ronan, all of which are delicious and unique to different regions.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the idea of a country with multiple languages and cultures. Do you think it's more challenging to navigate? Or do you think it's actually an advantage?
Well, I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. On the one hand, it can be challenging to navigate, especially if you're not fluent in multiple languages. But on the other hand, it's also a great opportunity to learn and experience different cultures.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's worth noting that both Seychelles and Switzerland have made significant efforts to promote cultural diversity and tolerance.
Absolutely. And it's heartening to see that both countries are committed to preserving their cultural heritage while also embracing modernity and diversity.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today's topic. But before we move on, I just want to say that I'm grateful to our listeners for joining us on this journey of discovery.
And I'm grateful to Mira for her enthusiasm and energy. It's been a pleasure discussing cultural diversity and tolerance with you both.
Hey, let's dive into the educational scene in Seychelles, shall we? I'm curious to know. Leo, what makes Seychelles stand out in terms of literacy rates and educational opportunities?
Great question. Mira, Seychelles has made significant strides in improving its literacy rates, with a whopping 92% of the population being literate. That's impressive, don't you think? And what's even more fascinating is that the country has a strong focus on vocational training, which helps equip students with skills that are in high demand in the job market.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree that vocational training is essential for preparing students for the workforce. Speaking of which, have you heard about the Seychelles Institute of Technology? I've heard it's a great place to learn about various trades and technologies.
Yes. The Seychelles Institute of Technology is indeed a fantastic institution. They offer a range of programs in fields like hospitality, tourism, and engineering, among others. And what's great is that they also have a strong focus on entrepreneurship, which helps students develop the skills they need to start their own businesses.
That's fantastic. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the entrepreneurship program at the Seychelles Institute of Technology. Perhaps we can get some testimonials from students who have benefited from the program. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do they think vocational training is essential for preparing students for the workforce?
Great point. Mira, I think it's essential for students to have a solid understanding of vocational skills, especially in a country like Seychelles where tourism and hospitality are such significant contributors to the economy. And speaking of tourism, have you heard about the Seychelles Tourism Board's initiative to promote sustainable tourism practices among students? It's a great way to encourage students to think about the impact of their actions on the environment.
Yes. I've heard about that initiative. And it's fantastic to see the Seychelles Tourism Board taking the lead in promoting sustainable tourism practices. But let's talk about language schools in Seychelles. I've heard that English is the primary language spoken. But what about Creole and French? Are they also widely spoken?
Yes. Creole and French are indeed widely spoken in Seychelles, especially among the older population. In fact, Creole is an official language of the country, and many students learn it as a second language. And what's great is that the country has a strong focus on language education, with many schools offering courses in Creole, French, and English.
That's fantastic. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the language schools in Seychelles. Perhaps we can get some testimonials from students who have learned Creole or French. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the importance of learning a second language. Do they think it's essential for students to learn a second language? Especially in a country like Seychelles where there are multiple languages spoken.
Ah, great point. Mira, I think learning a second language is essential for students to develop their communication skills and to better understand the cultural context of the country. And speaking of cultural context, have you heard about the Seychelles National Library? It's a great resource for students to learn about the country's history and culture.
Ah, yes. I've heard about the Seychelles National Library. And it's a fantastic resource for students to learn about the country's history and culture. But let's talk about Switzerland. I've heard that it's known for its excellent education system, with a strong focus on academic rigor and discipline. What makes Switzerland's education system stand out? Leo?
Great question. Mira, Switzerland's education system is indeed renowned for its academic rigor and discipline. One of the things that sets it apart is the emphasis on vocational training, similar to Seychelles. But what's unique about Switzerland is the focus on apprenticeships, which allows students to gain hands-on experience in their chosen field.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm sure our listeners living in Switzerland would agree that apprenticeships are a great way to gain practical experience. Speaking of which, have you heard about the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology? I've heard it's a world-renowned institution for engineering and technology.
Yes. The Swiss Federal Institute of Technology is indeed a world-renowned institution. They offer a range of programs in fields like engineering, physics, and mathematics, among others. And what's great is that they also have a strong focus on research and development, which helps students develop their critical skills.
That's fantastic. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the research and development programs at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. Perhaps we can get some testimonials from students who have benefited from the program. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the importance of research and development in education. Do they think it's essential for students to learn about research methods and critical?
Great point. Mira, I think research and development are essential for students to develop their critical skills and to stay up to date with the latest developments in their field. And speaking of language schools in Switzerland, have you heard about the Swiss Language School? It's a great resource for students to learn about the country's languages, including German, French, and Italian.
Yes. I've heard about the Swiss Language School, and it's a fantastic resource for students to learn about the country's languages. But let's talk about the Swiss education system in general. I've heard that it's highly competitive, with students facing rigorous exams and assessments. What's it like to be a student in Switzerland? Leo?
Great question. Mira, being a student in Switzerland can be challenging. Indeed, the education system is highly competitive, and students face rigorous exams and assessments. But what's great is that the system also places a strong emphasis on individualized learning, which allows students to develop their skills and talents in a more personalized way.
That's fantastic. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the individualized learning approach in Switzerland. Perhaps we can get some testimonials from students who have benefited from the approach. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the importance of individualized learning. Do they think it's essential for students to have a more personalized learning experience?
Great point. Mira, I think individualized learning is essential for students to develop their skills and talents in a more personalized way. And speaking of language schools, have you heard about the language schools in Switzerland that offer courses in English? I've heard that they're very popular among international students.
Yes. I've heard about the language schools in Switzerland that offer courses in English, and they're indeed very popular among international students. But let's talk about the Swiss culture in general. I've heard that it's known for its neutrality and stability. What? I'm so to dive into climate in Seychelles and Switzerland. Who else is ready to explore the tropical paradise of Seychelles and the breathtaking mountains of Switzerland?
I know I am. I've always wanted to visit Seychelles and experience the warm weather, beautiful beaches, and crystal clear waters. And Switzerland. Well, who wouldn't want to see the majestic Alps and enjoy the delicious chocolate?
Exactly. And let's talk about temperature. Seychelles has a tropical marine climate, with average temperatures ranging from 24 to 30 degrees Celsius throughout the year. Meanwhile, Switzerland has a temperate climate, with temperatures ranging from 2 to 20 degrees Celsius.
Wow, that's a big difference. I can already imagine the contrast between the warm Seychelles and the chilly Switzerland. But what about extreme weather events? Do either of these countries experience any?
Actually, Seychelles is prone to cyclones, which can bring heavy rainfall and strong winds. But the good news is that they're relatively rare, and the country is well prepared to deal with them. Switzerland, on the other hand, experiences a lot of snowfall, especially in the mountains.
Ah, I can imagine. The Swiss Alps must be breathtaking in the snow. But what about local adaptations? How do the people of Seychelles and Switzerland cope with their respective climates?
Well, in Seychelles, the locals have developed a strong sense of community and resilience in the face of cyclones. They work together to prepare for the storms and rebuild after they pass. In Switzerland, the people have adapted to the harsh winters by building sturdy homes and using advanced technology to stay warm and safe.
That's so fascinating. I'm curious. What about the impact of climate change on these countries? Are they experiencing any unusual weather patterns?
Actually, Seychelles is one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change. Rising sea levels and more frequent cyclones are just a few of the challenges they're facing. Switzerland, on the other hand, is also experiencing the effects of climate change, but in a different way. They're seeing more frequent heat waves and droughts in the summer.
Wow, it's amazing how different the two countries are in terms of climate and seasonal conditions. But what about the cultural impact? How do these climates shape the lifestyle and culture of the people in Seychelles and Switzerland?
That's a great question. In Seychelles, the tropical climate has led to a laid-back, beach-focused lifestyle. The locals love to spend time outdoors, enjoying the beautiful beaches and crystal-clear waters. In Switzerland, the cold climate has led to a more rugged, outdoorsy lifestyle. The people love to ski, hike, and enjoy the beautiful mountains.
I can see that. And what about the tourists? What do they usually experience when visiting these countries?
Well, in Seychelles, tourists often come to experience the beautiful beaches, crystal clear waters, and coral reefs. They can also enjoy the unique Creole culture and delicious seafood. In Switzerland, tourists often come to experience the breathtaking mountains, picturesque villages, and delicious chocolates.
Chocolate. I'm getting hungry just about. And what about the local flora and fauna? Are there any unique species found in Seychelles and Switzerland?
Actually, Seychelles is home to a unique and diverse array of flora and fauna, including the famous cocoa de mer palm tree and the Seychelles warbler. Switzerland, on the other hand, is home to a variety of alpine flowers and animals, including the ibex and the chalmers.
Wow, I had no idea. And finally, what advice would you give to our listeners who are planning a trip to either of these countries?
That's a great question. If you're planning a trip to Seychelles, make sure to pack light, breathable clothing and sunscreen. And if you're planning a trip to Switzerland, make sure to pack warm clothing and waterproof gear.
Excellent advice. And don't forget to try the local cuisine and drinks in both countries. Seychelles is famous for its seafood and Creole cuisine, while Switzerland is famous for its chocolate and fondue.
Exactly. And if you have any questions or comments, please let us know in the comments section below. We'd love to hear from you.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more exciting content and comparisons between countries. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
And finally, if you're still wondering which country is better, Seychelles or Switzerland, well, that's a tough one. But I think we can all agree that both countries have their unique charms and attractions.
Absolutely. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll have a showdown between Seychelles and Switzerland. But for now, let's just enjoy the beauty and wonder of both countries.
I'm to dive into the culinary scene of Seychelles and Switzerland. Who wouldn't want to indulge in the flavors of these beautiful countries?
That's right. Mira, Seychelles, with its African, French, and Asian influences, offers a unique blend of flavors. And Switzerland, with its rich cheese and chocolate traditions, is a food lover's paradise.
I'm certain that our listeners living in these countries would agree with me. Seychelles Creole cuisine is a fusion of African, French, and Asian flavors, with popular dishes like poisson sea, OU and ROU gala.
Ah, yes. And Switzerland's fondue and raclette are staples of their cuisine. But what's interesting is how both countries cater to various nutritional needs. Seychelles, for instance, has a growing focus on healthy eating, with an emphasis on fresh seafood and locally sourced produce.
That's fascinating. Leo! And Switzerland, with its emphasis on dairy and meat, offers a range of options for vegetarians and vegans. But I'm curious, have you tried the Swiss chocolate?
Of course, I have. Who hasn't? But seriously, Swiss chocolate is a treat, and Seychelles has its own unique take on desserts, like the coconut rice pudding, or gâteau.
That sounds delicious. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the food culture in Seychelles. Can you tell us more about the traditional markets and food festivals?
Ah, yes. Seychelles is a vibrant market scene, with markets like the Victoria Market and the Anse Royal Market offering a range of fresh produce and local delicacies. And the food festivals? Oh, they're a must-see. The Seychelles International Carnival of Creole Music and Dance is a highlight of the year.
Wow, that sounds like an incredible experience. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the impact of tourism on the local food scene. How has tourism affected the way people eat in Seychelles?
That's a great question. Mira, with the rise of tourism, Seychelles has seen a shift towards more Western-style cuisine, which has had both positive and negative effects on the local food scene. But overall, I think it's been a net positive, as it's introduced new flavors and ingredients to the local cuisine.
I see what you mean. And in Switzerland, how has the emphasis on cheese and chocolate affected the local food scene?
Well, it certainly had a positive impact, with many Swiss farmers and producers focusing on high-quality dairy and chocolate products. And the emphasis on local and seasonal produce has also led to a greater focus on sustainability.
That's great to hear. Leo, and I'm curious, what do you think our listeners would say about the food culture in Seychelles and Switzerland? Do you think they would agree that the emphasis on local and seasonal produce is a positive trend?
I think they would agree. Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on food education and cooking classes, which is fantastic for promoting healthy eating and culinary skills.
Absolutely. Leo. And finally, I think our listeners would love to know more about the unique food traditions in Seychelles and Switzerland. Can you tell us more about the traditional dishes and cooking methods in each country?
Yes. Seychelles has a rich tradition of cooking seafood, with methods like grilling and steaming being popular. And Switzerland has a long history of cheese making, with many traditional cheeses like Emmental and Gruyere being made in the country.
Well, that's fascinating. And I think our listeners would love to know more about the impact of climate change on the food scene in both countries. How is climate change affecting the food culture in Seychelles and Switzerland?
That's a great question. Mira, climate change is certainly having an impact on the food scene in both countries, with rising temperatures and changing weather patterns affecting crop yields and food availability.
I see what you mean. And finally, I think our listeners would love to know more about the unique food experiences in Seychelles and Switzerland. Can you tell us more about the best places to eat and drink in each country?
Yes. Seychelles has a range of great restaurants and cafes, with many serving local Creole cuisine. And Switzerland has a vibrant food scene, with many traditional restaurants and cafes serving dishes like fondue and dragla.
Wow, that sounds like an incredible experience. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the local ingredients and produce used in each country. Can you tell us more about the best ingredients and produce to use in Seychelles and Switzerland?
Ah, yes. Seychelles has a range of fresh produce, including coconuts, fish, and tropical fruits. And Switzerland has a rich tradition of dairy and meat production, with many high-quality cheeses and meats being produced in the country.
That sounds delicious. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the food culture in Seychelles and Switzerland. Can you tell us more about the traditional markets and food festivals in each country?
Ah, yes. Seychelles has a vibrant market scene, with markets like the Victoria Market and the Anse Royale Market offering a range of fresh produce and local delicacies. And the food festivals? Oh, they're a must-see. The Seychelles International Carnival of Creole Music and Dance is a highlight of the year.
Wow, that sounds like an incredible experience. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the impact of tourism on the local food scene in Seychelles. How has tourism affected the way people eat in Seychelles?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, with the rise of tourism, Seychelles has seen a shift towards more Western-style cuisine, which has had both positive and negative effects on the local food scene. But overall, I think it's been a net positive, as it's introduced new flavors and ingredients to the local cuisine.
I see what you mean. And finally, I think our listeners would love to know more about the unique food traditions in Seychelles and in Switzerland. Can you tell us more about the traditional dishes and cooking methods in each country?
Ah, yes. Seychelles has a rich tradition of cooking seafood, with methods like grilling and steaming being popular. And Switzerland has a long history of cheese making, with many traditional cheeses like Emmental and Gruyere being made in the country.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I think our listeners would love to know more about the food culture in Seychelles and Switzerland. Can you tell us more about the local markets and food festivals in each country?
Ah, yes. Seychelles has a range of great markets, with many offering fresh produce and local delicacies. And
So, let's dive into the historical, cultural, and artistic values of Seychelles and Switzerland. Both countries have a rich heritage, but I'm curious, Leo, have you ever been to a Seychelles Creole festival?
actually, I haven't, but I've heard about their vibrant music and dance. In Switzerland, we have a more subdued approach to cultural celebrations, but they're no less beautiful. Have you been to the Lucerne Festival?
Oh, yes. The Lucerne Festival is amazing, but I'm more drawn to the Seychelles Creole festivals, where you can experience the mix of African, French, and Asian influences. It's like a party.
That sounds incredible. I'd love to experience it. Switzerland, on the other hand, has a strong tradition of folk music and dance, like the ALP horn blowing and the yodeling. It's a unique sound.
Unique. Indeed. I can imagine the ALP horn blowing would be quite the experience. But have you noticed how both countries have a strong sense of community? In Seychelles, it's all about the Creole family ties. And in Switzerland, it's the close-knit communities in the Alps.
That's true. Community is a big part of both cultures. And speaking of community, I've heard that Seychelles has a strong tradition of art and craft, like with carving and pottery. Jedolf, I loves uncovering stories like this. And so do we.
Exactly. And Switzerland has its own unique art scene, with famous artists like Paul Klee and Alberto Joe Cametti. But I think what's fascinating about Seychelles is the way their art is deeply connected to their natural environment.
That's a great point. The connection to nature is a big part of both countries' art scenes. In Switzerland, you have the beautiful Alpine landscapes, and in Seychelles, you have the stunning beaches and coral reefs.
And the coral reefs. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the coral reefs in Seychelles. They're a major part of the country's ecosystem and a popular tourist attraction.
Absolutely. The coral reefs are a wonder to behold. And speaking of tourism, I've heard that Seychelles is working hard to preserve its natural environment and cultural heritage for future generations.
That's so important. And Switzerland has its own initiatives to preserve its cultural heritage, like the Swiss National Heritage Sites. But I think what's unique about Seychelles is the way they're blending traditional and modern elements in their art and culture.
I agree. It's a fascinating blend of old and new. And I think that's what makes both countries so interesting to learn about. Jeddah, yeah, I'm sure, would love to feature more stories like this in their platform.
Absolutely. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the historical, cultural, and artistic values of both Seychelles and Switzerland. So, let's keep exploring and learning about these incredible countries.
Sounds like a plan. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll have a Creole festival in Switzerland and a Swiss-style folk music festival in Seychelles.
No, that's an idea I can get behind. And who knows? Maybe we'll even have a joint festival with both countries coming together to celebrate their unique cultural heritage.
That would be amazing. And I'm sure Jeddah, I would love to be a part of it.
Indeed they would. And who knows? Maybe our listeners will be the ones to make it happen. So, let's keep dreaming and learning about these incredible countries.
Sounds like a plan.
Seychelles, an archipelago off the coast of East Africa, boasts an incredible array of natural wonders, from the towering granite peaks of Mont Whitecellos to the stunning beaches of Anse d'Argent. Each island is a treasure trove of unique landscapes.
I'm with you. Mira, Seychelles is a paradise for nature lovers. But have you ever wondered how its unique landscapes were formed? I mean, it's not just a coincidence that the islands are surrounded by crystal clear waters and coral reefs.
Ah, excellent point. Leo, the formation of Seychelles is indeed fascinating. The islands were created by volcanic activity millions of years ago, which left behind a unique geological landscape. And speaking of unique landscapes, let's talk about Switzerland.
Ah, yes. Switzerland. Land of mountains, lakes, and chocolate. But seriously, Mira, Switzerland's natural beauty is unmatched. From the picturesque villages of the Swiss Alps to the serene lakes of the Bernese Oberland, each region is a feast for the eyes.
That's so true. Leo, Switzerland's diverse landscapes are a result of its unique geography. The Alps, Jura, and Pre-Alps mountains create a stunning backdrop for the country's picturesque villages and towns.
And let's not forget about the lakes. Mira, Switzerland has over 500 lakes, each with its own unique character. From the largest lake, Lake Geneva, to the smallest, Lake Oeschinen, each lake offers breathtaking views and opportunities for water sports.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the lakes in Switzerland. Do you think they're as stunning as I do? Please let us know in the comments.
I'm sure they are. Mira, but what about the forests in Seychelles? I mean, they're not as well known as the beaches, but they're still an essential part of the country's ecosystem.
Ah, great point. Leo, Seychelles has several national parks and nature reserves that protect its unique forests. And speaking of forests, Switzerland has some of the most beautiful forests in Europe, including the Black Forest and the Jura Forest.
That's right. Mira, Switzerland's forests are not only beautiful, but also home to a diverse range of wildlife. From the majestic ibex to the playful marmots, each forest is a haven for nature lovers.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Switzerland would agree with me that the country's forests are a treasure trove of natural beauty. But what about the unique landscapes in Seychelles? Have you ever heard of the Valley d'Ima?
Ah, yes. The Valley d'Ima is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the most unique landscapes in Seychelles. It's home to the famous Cocoa de Mer tree, which produces the largest seed in the world.
That's right. Leo, the Valley d'Ima is a true natural wonder, and its unique ecosystem supports a wide range of flora and fauna. And speaking of unique landscapes, let's talk about the mountain peaks in Switzerland.
Ah, yes. Switzerland has some of the most impressive mountain peaks in the world, including the Matterhorn and the Jungfrau. Each peak offers breathtaking views and opportunities for hiking and skiing.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the mountain peaks in Switzerland. Do you think they're as impressive as I do? Please let us know in the comments.
I'm sure they are. Mira, But what about the waterfalls in Seychelles? I mean, they're not as well known as the beaches, but they're still an essential part of the country's ecosystem.
Ah, great point. Leo, Seychelles has several waterfalls, including the stunning Victoria Waterfall. And speaking of waterfalls, Switzerland has some of the most beautiful waterfalls in Europe, including the Rhine Falls and the Tierremorbach Falls.
That's right. Mira, Switzerland's waterfalls are not only beautiful but also an essential part of the country's hydroelectric power system. And speaking of power, let's talk about the unique landscapes that power the hydroelectric dams in Seychelles.
Ah, yes. Seychelles has several hydroelectric dams that generate power for the country. And speaking of power, Switzerland has some of the most advanced hydroelectric power systems in the world.
Ah, that's right. Mira, Switzerland's hydroelectric power systems are not only efficient but also environmentally friendly. And speaking of efficiency, let's talk about the unique landscapes that make Seychelles one of the most efficient countries in terms of energy production.
Ah, yes. Seychelles has several renewable energy sources, including wind and solar power, that make it one of the most efficient countries in terms of energy production. And speaking of efficiency, Switzerland has some of the most efficient public transportation systems in the world.
That's right. Mira, Switzerland's public transportation system is not only efficient but also environmentally friendly. And speaking of efficiency, let's talk about the unique landscapes that make Seychelles one of the most efficient countries in terms of tourism.
Ah, yes. Seychelles has several unique landscapes that make it one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world. And speaking of tourism, Switzerland has some of the most beautiful tourist destinations in the world.
That's right. Mira, Switzerland's tourist destinations are not only beautiful but also offer a wide range of activities for visitors, from hiking and skiing to shopping and dining.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the tourist destinations in Switzerland. Do you think they're as beautiful as I do? Please let us know in the comments.
Ha, I'm sure they are. Mira, but what about the unique landscapes that make Seychelles one of the most unique countries in terms of natural beauty?
Ah, great point. Leo, Seychelles has several unique landscapes that make it one of the most unique countries in terms of natural beauty. And speaking of uniqueness, let's talk about the unique landscapes that make Switzerland one of the most beautiful countries in the world.
Yes. Switzerland has several unique landscapes that make it one of the most beautiful countries in the world. From the picturesque villages of the Swiss Alps to the serene lakes of the Bernese Oberland, each region is a feast for the eyes.
That's right. Leo, Switzerland's unique landscapes are a result of its unique geography. The Alps, Jura, and Pre-Alps mountains create a stunning backdrop for the country's picturesque villages and towns.
And let's not forget about the forests in Seychelles. Mira, they're not as well known as the beaches, but they're still an essential part of the country's ecosystem.
Great point. Leah, Seychelles has several national parks and nature reserves that protect its unique forests. And speaking of forests, Switzerland has some of. And to dive into the world of sports, activities, and adventure options in Seychelles and Switzerland, let's start with the beautiful islands of Seychelles, where the stunning beaches and crystal clear waters offer endless opportunities for water sports. From snorkeling and diving to kayaking and paddleboarding, there's something for every thrill seeker.
Yes. Seychelles is a paradise for water sports enthusiasts. But have you ever tried rock climbing in Seychelles? Mira, I heard it's a real challenge, with towering granite cliffs and breathtaking views.
Actually, Leo, I was going to mention rock climbing in Seychelles. The islands offer some of the most unique and challenging rock climbing routes in the world. And for those who prefer a more leisurely activity, Seychelles also has a rich cultural heritage, with many museums and historical sites to explore.
That's right. Yeah. And speaking of culture, I'm curious about the sports scene in Switzerland. What's the most popular sport in Switzerland, do you think?
In Switzerland, it's all about Alpine skiing and snowboarding. Leo! The Swiss Alps offer some of the most stunning and challenging slopes in the world. And if you are not a fan of winter sports, don't worry. Switzerland has plenty of other options, like hiking and mountain biking.
I've heard that Switzerland has some of the most scenic hiking trails in the world. But what about adventure sports? Mira, I've heard that Switzerland is a hub for paragliding and skydiving.
That's right. Leo, Switzerland is a thrill-seeker's paradise, with many adventure sports to choose from. And if you're looking for something a bit more relaxing, Seychelles has plenty of beautiful beaches and coves to explore.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the sports scene in Seychelles. Do you think the country's focus on water sports is a good thing? Or should they diversify their offerings?
I'm sure our listeners in Seychelles would agree with me that the country's focus on water sports is a huge draw for tourists. But, at the same time, it's great to see the government investing in other sports and activities, like rock climbing and hiking.
That's a great point. Mira, and speaking of hiking, I've heard that Switzerland has some of the most beautiful and challenging hiking trails in the world. Have you ever hiked in the Swiss Alps? Mira?
Oh, yes. Leo, I have hiked in the Swiss Alps, and it was an incredible experience. The scenery is breathtaking, and the trails are well marked and well maintained.
I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your hiking experience in the Swiss Alps. Mira, maybe you can share some tips and recommendations for our listeners who are planning a trip to Switzerland.
Thank you, Leo. And speaking of tips and recommendations, I'd love to hear from our listeners about their favorite sports and activities in Seychelles and Switzerland. Do you have any suggestions for our listeners? Leo?
Yes. Mira, I do have a few suggestions. For our listeners who are looking for a unique adventure experience, I recommend trying paragliding in Switzerland. The views are simply stunning, and the experience is truly unforgettable.
That sounds amazing. Leo, and for our listeners who are looking for a more leisurely activity, I recommend trying hiking in the Swiss Alps. The scenery is breathtaking, and the trails are well marked and well maintained.
I'm sure our listeners would agree with us that Seychelles and Switzerland are two of the most beautiful and exciting countries in the world. And with their unique sports and activities, it's no wonder that tourists flock to these countries every year.
That's right, Leo. And speaking of tourists, I'm curious about what our listeners think about the sports and activities seen in Seychelles and Switzerland. Do you think these countries are doing enough to promote their unique offerings to tourists?
That's a great question. Mira, I think both countries are doing a great job of promoting their unique sports and activities to tourists. But at the same time, I think there's always room for improvement.
I agree, Leo. And speaking of improvement, I think it's great to see both countries investing in their sports and activities infrastructure. Whether it's building new hiking trails or investing in water sports facilities, it's clear that both countries are committed to providing their visitors with an unforgettable experience.
That's right, Mira. And speaking of unforgettable experiences, I think we've only scratched the surface of the sports and activities seen in Seychelles and Switzerland. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about these countries and their unique offerings.
Thank you, Leo. And speaking of our listeners, I'd love to hear from them about their favorite sports and activities in Seychelles and Switzerland. Do you have any suggestions for our listeners, Leo?
Yes. Mira, I do have a few suggestions. For our listeners who are looking for a unique adventure experience, I recommend trying paragliding in Switzerland. The views are simply stunning, and the experience is truly unforgettable.
That sounds amazing, Leo. And for our listeners who are looking for a more leisurely activity, I recommend trying hiking in the Swiss Alps. The scenery is breathtaking, and the trails are well marked and well maintained.
I'm sure our listeners would agree with us that Seychelles and Switzerland are two of the most beautiful and exciting countries in the world. And with their unique sports and activities, it's no wonder that tourists flock to these countries every year.
That's right, Leo. And speaking of tourists, I'm curious about what our listeners think about the sports and activities seen in Seychelles and Switzerland. Do you think these countries are doing enough to promote their unique offerings to tourists?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, I think both countries are doing a great job of promoting their unique sports and activities to tourists. But at the same time, I think there's always room for improvement.
I agree. Leo, and speaking of improvement, I think it's great to see both countries investing in their sports and activities infrastructure. Whether it's building new hiking trails or investing in water sports facilities, it's clear that both countries are committed to providing their visitors with an unforgettable experience.
That's right, Mira. And speaking of unforgettable experiences, I think we've only scratched the surface of the sports and activities seen in Seychelles and Switzerland. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about these countries and their unique offerings.
Ah, thank you, Leah. And speaking of our listeners, I'd love to hear from them about their favorite sports and activities in Seychelles and Switzerland. Do you have any suggestions for our listeners? Leo?
Ah, yes.
So let's talk about nightlife in Seychelles. I'm sure our listeners living in this country would agree with me that the island vibes are perfect for a relaxed evening out. The beaches are stunning, and the sunsets are breathtaking. But what about the actual nightlife? Do you think Seychelles has what it takes to keep the party going all night long?
Ah, I'm curious to see how Seychelles compares to Switzerland in terms of nightlife. I mean, Switzerland is known for its sophisticated, unelegant atmosphere. But can it match the laid-back island vibes of Seychelles? Let's find out.
Well, Seychelles has a unique blend of local culture and international influences, which creates a fascinating nightlife scene. You can find everything from beach bars to clubs, and even some amazing live music venues. And, of course, the beaches are always a great place to end the night with a romantic stroll.
That sounds amazing. Mira. But I have to ask, what about the crowds? I've heard that Seychelles can get pretty crowded, especially during peak season. How does that affect the nightlife experience?
Ah, good point. Leo, yes, Seychelles can get crowded, but that's all part of the charm, right? And the crowds actually add to the energy of the nightlife scene. Plus, there are plenty of hidden gems and secluded spots that are perfect for a more intimate evening out.
I see what you mean. And speaking of secluded spots, have you heard about the famous Valley D My Nature Reserve on the island of Praslin? It's supposed to be a real hidden gem, and I'm curious to know more about it.
Ah, yes. Valley Demai is definitely worth visiting, especially at night. The reserve is home to some of the most unique and exotic flora and fauna in the world, and it's a real treat to explore it under the stars. And if you time it right, you can even catch a glimpse of the famous Coco de Mer, which is only found in Seychelles.
Wow, that sounds incredible. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. But let's get back to the nightlife scene in Seychelles. What about the music? I've heard that Seychelles has a thriving music scene, with a mix of local and international influences.
Ah, yes. The music scene in Seychelles is amazing. You can find everything from traditional Creole music to modern electronic dance music. And the best part is that the music is often performed live, which adds to the energy and intimacy of the nightlife experience.
That sounds fantastic. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the music scene in Seychelles. But let's compare it to Switzerland for a moment. I mean, Switzerland has a rich cultural heritage and a thriving art scene. But how does it compare to Seychelles in terms of music?
Ah, good question. Leo, Switzerland has a very different music scene. Of course. But what's interesting is that it's also very eclectic and diverse, with a mix of traditional folk music, classical music, and modern electronic music. And like Seychelles, Switzerland has a thriving arts scene, with plenty of museums, galleries, and festivals to explore.
I see what you mean. And speaking of festivals, have you heard about the famous Geneva International Film Festival? It's supposed to be one of the biggest and most prestigious film festivals in the world, and I'm curious to know more about it.
Ah, yes. The Geneva International Film Festival is definitely worth checking out, especially if you're a film buff. And it's a great way to experience the Swiss culture and way of life. But let's get back to Seychelles for a moment. What about the food and drink scene? I've heard that Seychelles has a unique and delicious cuisine, with a mix of African, European, and Asian influences.
Ah, yes. The food and drink scene in Seychelles is amazing. You can find everything from fresh seafood to traditional Creole dishes like the famous coconut prawns. And, of course, there's plenty of delicious local rum to go around.
I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the food and drink scene in Seychelles. But let's compare it to Switzerland for a moment. I mean, Switzerland is famous for its chocolate and cheese, but how does it compare to Seychelles in terms of cuisine?
Oh, good question. Mira, Switzerland has a very different cuisine, of course. But what's interesting is that it's also very hearty and comforting, with a focus on local ingredients and traditional dishes like fondue and raclette. And, like Seychelles, Switzerland has a thriving food and drink scene, with plenty of restaurants, cafes, and markets to explore.
I see what you mean. And speaking of markets, have you heard about the famous Geneva market? It's supposed to be one of the biggest and most vibrant markets in the world, and I'm curious to know more about it.
Ah, yes. The Geneva market is definitely worth checking out, especially if you're a foodie or a shopaholic. And it's a great way to experience the Swiss culture and way of life.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for tonight. Folks, thanks for joining us on this journey through the nightlife and entertainment venues of Seychelles and Switzerland. We hope you've learned something new and interesting. And we can't wait to hear your thoughts and comments in the comments section below.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, so you can stay up to date with all our latest podcasts and videos. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Dive into the wonderful world of family-friendly environments and children's activities in Seychelles and Switzerland. I'm curious, Leo, what makes Seychelles stand out in this regard?
Ah, Seychelles. A tropical paradise with crystal clear water, powdery white beaches, and a vibrant culture. For families, it's a dream come true. The island nation offers a range of activities that cater to all ages, from snorkeling and swimming with dolphins to exploring the stunning Valley de Mai Nature Reserve.
That sounds incredible. I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me. The country's emphasis on preserving its natural beauty and unique wildlife makes it an ideal destination for families who love the outdoors. But, Leo, what about Switzerland? How does it compare in terms of family-friendly activities?
Ah, Switzerland. A country known for its picturesque mountains, delicious chocolate, and precision engineering. But did you know that it also offers an array of family activities and attractions? From the Jungfraujoch, the top of Europe, to the Swiss Alps' many scenic hiking trails, there's no shortage of adventure for families to enjoy.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think the Swiss Alps are a more suitable destination for families with young children compared to the tropical climate of Seychelles? Perhaps we can get some feedback in the comments section.
I think our listeners will be to know that both countries have their own unique charm. While Seychelles offers a more relaxed, beach-focused experience, Switzerland provides a more structured, educational environment for families. But let's not forget about the amazing theme parks and museums in Switzerland that are perfect for kids.
That's a great point. The Swiss Science Center Technorama and the Geneva Museum of Art and History are just two examples of the many family-friendly museums and science that Switzerland has to offer. But I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the unique experiences available in Seychelles. Can you tell us more about the country's family-friendly parks and gardens? Leo?
Ah, yes. Seychelles is home to some of the most beautiful and well-maintained parks and gardens in the world. The Botanical Gardens in Victoria, the capital city, is a must-visit for families. with its stunning collection of tropical plants and flowers. It's a perfect place for kids to learn about the importance of conservation in the natural world.
That sounds amazing. And, Leah, I have to ask, what about the language barrier in Seychelles? As a non-native speaker, I'm sure many families might find it challenging to communicate with locals. How do you think they can overcome this obstacle?
Oh, that's a great question. Mira, while it's true that Creole is the official language of Seychelles, many locals speak English, especially in the tourism industry. However, I recommend that families learn a few basic Creole phrases to show respect for the local culture and to make their interactions more enjoyable. And, of course, there are many resources available online to help families prepare for their trip.
That's a great tip. Leo, I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the advice. And, speaking of advice, I think it's time for us to wrap up this criterion. But, before we do, I'd like to ask our listeners, what do you think is the most family-friendly aspect of Seychelles or Switzerland? Please share your thoughts in the comments section.
I think we just scratched the surface of what these two countries have to offer families. But I'm sure our listeners will agree that both Seychelles and Switzerland are wonderful destinations for families to explore and create unforgettable memories.
Well, that's all for now. But stay tuned for our next criterion, where we'll be discussing the unique aspects of each country's cuisine and how they cater to families with dietary restrictions.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media for more exciting content and behind-the-scenes insights into our research and travel experiences.
Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.
And remember, family is not just about blood ties, but about creating unforgettable memories together, no matter where you are in the world.
Dive into the LGBT-friendly atmosphere in Seychelles and Switzerland. I'm to share some inspiring stories and insights from these two beautiful countries. Well,
Yes. Both Seychelles and Switzerland have made significant strides in promoting inclusivity and acceptance. But let's be real. Mira, Seychelles has a much more relaxed vibe when it comes to the rainbow community. Oh.
well, Leo, you are not wrong. Seychelles has a reputation for being a welcoming and accepting country. But what about Switzerland? Don't they have a more conservative reputation?
Yes. Switzerland is often associated with neutrality and tradition. However, in recent years, they've made significant efforts to promote LGBT rights and inclusivity. Whoa!
I'm curious. Leo, what makes you think Switzerland is improved in this area? Is it the Pride events or something else?
Yes. The Pride events in Switzerland are amazing. Zurich and Geneva, in particular, have some of the most vibrant and colorful Pride parades in the world. Oh,
Wow, that's impressive. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the Pride events in Switzerland. Maybe we can even share some videos or photos in the comments section.
exactly. And it's not just the Pride events. Mira, Switzerland has also made significant strides in promoting LGBT inclusivity in education and employment.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think it's easier to be an LGBT individual in Seychelles or Switzerland? Let us know in the comments.
Oh, come on. Mira, you know I'm a fan of Seychelles. But Switzerland has some amazing initiatives to support LGBT individuals. For example, they have a special program to support LGBT youth in schools. Oh,
Well, Leo, I think we can both agree that both countries have their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to LGBT inclusivity. But what about the community? Are there any inspiring stories or organizations that we can share with our listeners?
yes. There are some amazing organizations and communities in both Seychelles and Switzerland that are working tirelessly to promote LGBT rights and inclusivity. In Seychelles, there's the Seychelles Rainbow Alliance, which is doing fantastic work to support LGBT individuals and promote inclusivity. Wow!
Wow, that's amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the Seychelles Rainbow Alliance. Maybe we can even share some interviews or stories from the community.
Exactly. And in Switzerland, there's the Swiss LGBT organization, which is working to promote LGBT rights and inclusivity across the country. Uh,
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the role of organizations like the Seychelles Rainbow Alliance and the Swiss LGBT organization. Do you think they're making a difference? Let us know in the comments.
oh, come on. Mira, you know I'm a fan of these organizations. They're doing amazing work to promote LGBT inclusivity and acceptance. Oh,
Well, Leo, I think we can both agree that both countries have made significant strides in promoting LGBT inclusivity. But what about the future? What can we expect to see in terms of progress and developments in Seychelles and Switzerland?
yes. The future is looking bright. Mira, both Seychelles and Switzerland are committed to promoting LGBT rights and inclusivity. And we can expect to see some amazing developments in the coming years. Whoa.
Well, that's exciting. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the future of LGBT inclusivity in Seychelles and Switzerland. Maybe we can even share some updates and news in the comments section.
Exactly. And it's not just about the future. Mira, we can also look back at the progress that's been made so far. Both Seychelles and Switzerland have come a long way in promoting LGBT inclusivity, and we should celebrate that.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the progress that's been made so far. Do you think it's enough? Let us know in the comments.
Oh, come on. Mira, you know I'm a fan of progress. And I think we can both agree that both Seychelles and Switzerland have made significant strides in promoting LGBT inclusivity. Oh,
Well, Leo, I think we can both agree that both countries have their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to LGBT inclusivity. But what about the importance of community and inclusivity? Why is it so important to promote LGBT inclusivity?
yes. Community and inclusivity are everything. Mira, when we promote LGBT inclusivity, we create a more welcoming and accepting environment for everyone. And that's what it's all about. Whoa!
Well, that's beautiful. Leo, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the importance of community and inclusivity. Maybe we can even share some inspiring stories or examples in the comments section.
Exactly. And it's not just about the LGBT community. Mira, inclusivity is for everyone. We should all strive to create a more welcoming and accepting environment for everyone.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the importance of inclusivity. Do you think it's something that we should all strive for? Let us know in the comments.
Oh, come on. Mira, you know I'm a fan of inclusivity. And I think we can both agree that both Seychelles and Switzerland have made significant strides in promoting LGBT inclusivity. Oh,
Well, Leo, I think we can both agree that both countries have made significant strides in promoting LGBT inclusivity. But what about the role of social media in promoting LGBT inclusivity? How can social media platforms support LGBT individuals and promote inclusivity?
yes. Social media is a powerful tool. Mira, it can be used to promote LGBT inclusivity and acceptance. And there are some amazing social media campaigns and initiatives that are doing fantastic work to support LGBT individuals. Whoa!
That's amazing! I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the social media campaigns and initiatives that are. I'm fascinated by Seychelles' reputation for being one of the most welcoming countries in the world. When I visited, I felt like I was part of the family. The Seychelles people have this incredible warmth and hospitality that's just infectious.
I've heard that Seychelles has a very strong Creole culture, which is all about community and inclusivity. It's no surprise that they're known for their warm welcomes. But I have to ask, Mira, what was the most memorable part of your experience there?
Oh, that's a great question. Leo, I think it was the way the locals would invite me to join them for meals and celebrations. They'd say, Mira, come and join us for dinner. We'll share our food and stories with you. It was like they were saying, You're part of our family now.
That sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree that the Creole culture is all about sharing and community. But what about Switzerland? How does the culture compare?
Ah, Switzerland is a bit different. Leo, while they're known for their precision and efficiency, they can also be a bit more reserved when it comes to interacting with foreigners. But that's not to say they're not welcoming. They just have a more formal approach to hospitality.
That's a good point. Mira, I've heard that Switzerland has a strong tradition of neutrality, which can sometimes make it difficult for foreigners to navigate their social norms. But I'm curious, what do you think is the biggest misconception about Swiss hospitality?
That's a great question. Leo, I think people often assume that the Swiss are cold and unfriendly, but that's not necessarily true. They just have a more formal way of showing hospitality, which can be misinterpreted as being cold.
I see what you mean. It's like they're saying, we're welcoming, but we're also very particular about our rules and traditions. But, what about the expat community in Switzerland? How do they fit into the local culture?
Ah, that's a great question. Leo, I've heard that the expat community in Switzerland is actually quite large and diverse. They have a lot of international organizations and events that cater to foreigners, which makes it easier for them to integrate into the local culture.
That's reassuring to hear. Mira, I'm sure our listeners who are moving to Switzerland would appreciate that information. But what about the cultural norms around integration? How do the Swiss approach this?
Ah, that's a great question. Leo, I think the Swiss have a very practical approach to integration, which is all about respecting the local culture and traditions. They encourage foreigners to learn the language and adapt to the local customs, but they also respect their individuality and cultural background.
That's a very inclusive approach. Mira, I'm sure our listeners would agree that respecting cultural differences is essential for building a strong expat community. And, finally, what advice would you give to our listeners who are planning to visit or move to either Seychelles or Switzerland?
Ah, that's a great question. Leo, I would say that both countries offer a unique cultural experience, and it's essential to approach each one with an open mind and a willingness to learn. In Seychelles, be prepared to be warmly welcomed and invited to join in local celebrations. In Switzerland, be prepared to learn about the local culture and traditions, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
That's great advice. Mira, I'm sure our listeners will appreciate your insights. And, finally, I have to ask, what's the most important thing you've learned from your experiences in both countries?
Ah, that's a great question. Leo, I think the most important thing I've learned is that hospitality and attitudes towards foreigners are not one size fits all. Each country has its unique approach, and it's essential to respect and appreciate those differences.
Well said. Mira, I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you. Leo, it's been a pleasure to chat with you about hospitality and attitudes towards foreigners in Seychelles and Switzerland.
And to our listeners, thanks for tuning into this episode. If you have any thoughts or comments, please let us know in the comments section below. We'd love to hear from you.
Dive into the fascinating world of internet infrastructure and digital facilities in Seychelles and Switzerland. I'm curious, Leo, how do you think these two countries compare in terms of connectivity and innovation?
Great question. Seychelles, being a small island nation, has had to rely on satellite internet and limited undersea cables, making connectivity a challenge. On the other hand, Switzerland has invested heavily in its fiber optic network, making it one of the most connected countries in the world.
That's fascinating. I've heard that Seychelles has been working on improving its internet infrastructure, especially with the introduction of 4G networks. But I'm sure it's still a long way to go before it catches up with Switzerland's tech as it advances.
Exactly. Switzerland's commitment to innovation is impressive, with its high-speed internet and cutting-edge digital infrastructure. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think it has the potential to catch up with Switzerland's digital pace?
That's a great question. Leo, I think it's definitely possible, especially with the growing demand for digital nomad hubs and remote work. Seychelles has a lot to offer, from its stunning beaches to its vibrant culture, making it an attractive destination for digital nomads.
Ah, I see what you mean. Seychelles has been trying to position itself as a hub for remote workers and entrepreneurs, with its relaxed atmosphere and beautiful landscapes. But Switzerland's strong tradition of innovation and entrepreneurship might give it an edge in terms of digital infrastructure and startup culture.
That's a valid point, Leo. But I think Seychelles has a lot of potential to tap into the digital nomad market, especially with its growing expat community. And who knows, maybe our listeners have some insights on this topic. What do you think about Seychelles as a digital nomad hub?
Well, I think it's definitely worth exploring, especially with the rise of remote work. But Switzerland's strong economy and innovation ecosystem might still make it a more attractive destination for digital nomads.
Ah, I see what you mean. But I think Seychelles has a unique selling point, its stunning natural beauty and relaxed atmosphere. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the digital landscape in Seychelles and Switzerland. Let's dive deeper into this topic.
Sounds good to me. Mira, so let's talk about the digital facilities in Seychelles. I've heard that the country has been investing in its digital infrastructure, especially with the introduction of gene networks and digital literacy programs.
That's right. Leah, Seychelles has been working on improving its digital literacy and providing access to digital facilities, especially in rural areas. But I'm sure it's still a challenge to keep up with Switzerland's high standard of digital facilities.
Ah, I see what you mean. Switzerland's digital facilities are indeed world-class. With it that we can conquer that. With its high-speed internet, cutting-edge digital infrastructure, and strong innovation ecosystem. But Seychelles has been making strides in this area, especially with its digital literacy programs and access to digital facilities.
I think that's an interesting point, Leo. But I'm curious, what do you think about the digital landscape in Seychelles and Switzerland? Do you think Seychelles has the potential to catch up with Switzerland's digital pace?
Well, I think it's definitely possible, especially with the growing demand for digital nomad hubs and remote work. But Switzerland's strong tradition of innovation and entrepreneurship might give it an edge in terms of digital infrastructure and startup culture.
I see what you mean. But I think Seychelles has a lot to offer, from its stunning beaches to its vibrant culture. And who knows, maybe our listeners have some insights on this topic. What do you think about Seychelles as a digital nomad hub?
Well, I think it's definitely worth exploring, especially with the rise of remote work. But Switzerland's strong economy and innovation ecosystem might still make it a more attractive destination for digital nomads.
I see what you mean. But I think Seychelles has a unique selling point, its stunning natural beauty and relaxed atmosphere. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the digital landscape in Seychelles and Switzerland. Let's wrap up this topic.
Sounds good to me. Mira, in conclusion, while Seychelles has made strides in improving its internet infrastructure and digital facilities, Switzerland's strong tradition of innovation and entrepreneurship might still give it an edge in terms of digital infrastructure and startup culture. But Seychelles has a lot to offer, from its stunning natural beauty to its vibrant culture, making it an attractive destination for digital nomads.
I agree. Leo, Seychelles has a lot of potential to tap into the digital nomad market, especially with its growing expat community. And who knows, maybe our listeners have some insights on this topic. What do you think about Seychelles as a digital nomad hub?
Well, I think it's definitely worth exploring, especially with the rise of remote work. But Switzerland's strong economy and innovation ecosystem might still make it a more attractive destination for digital nomads.
I see what you mean. But I think Seychelles has a unique selling point, its stunning natural beauty and relaxed atmosphere. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the digital landscape in Seychelles and Switzerland. Let's wrap up this topic.
Sounds good to me. Mira.
So, let's dive into the shopping scene in Seychelles. I've heard that their markets are a treasure trove of local crafts and unique souvenirs. Have you ever been to a market in Seychelles? Leo?
Actually, I have. And I must say, it was a sensory overload in the best possible way. The colors, the smells, the sounds, it was like a feast for the senses. And the prices? Oh, my friend, you can get some amazing deals on local handicrafts and souvenirs.
That sounds like a shopper's paradise. I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me. But what about the bigger picture? How does Seychelles' shopping scene compare to Switzerland's?
Ah, now that's an interesting question. Switzerland is known for its high-end shopping experience, with luxury brands and designer boutiques galore. But, if I'm being honest, it can be a bit pricey. I mean, you can easily drop a few hundred francs on a single item.
Yeah, I can imagine. But what about value for money? Do you think Seychelles offers better deals on quality products?
That's a tough one. I think Seychelles has its own unique charm. But when it comes to quality and price-performance balance, Switzerland might have the edge. But, hey, it depends on what you're looking for, right?
Exactly. And I think that's what makes shopping so exciting, the thrill of the hunt. The discovery of new treasures. Speaking of which, have you ever stumbled upon a hidden gem while shopping in Switzerland? Leo?
Actually, I have. I found this tiny little boutique in Zurich that sold the most exquisite handmade jewelry. It was like finding a diamond in the rough, I mean. A gem in the boutique.
That sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about that boutique. Maybe we can feature it in a future episode. But, back to Seychelles, what about the local markets? Do you think they're worth visiting?
Oh, absolutely. The markets are a must-visit in Seychelles. And let me tell you, the people watching is top-notch. You can see locals and tourists alike haggling over prices and laughing together.
That sounds like a great experience. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that people watching is one of the best parts of shopping. But what about the shopping centers in Seychelles? Are they on par with Switzerland's?
That's a good question. I think Seychelles has some great shopping centers, but they might not have the same level of sophistication as Switzerland's. But, hey, it's all about what you're looking for, right?
Exactly. And I think that's what makes shopping so fun, the discovery of new places and experiences. Speaking of which, have you ever shopped at a local market in Switzerland?
Actually, I have. And it was a bit of a culture shock, to be honest. I mean, the prices were higher than I expected, but the quality of the products was top-notch.
That sounds like a typical Swiss shopping experience. But what do you think is the key to finding good deals in Switzerland?
That's a good question. I think it's all about knowing what you're looking for and being willing to haggle. And, of course, having a good sense of humor doesn't hurt.
That's great advice. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that shopping is all about finding that perfect balance between quality and price. But what about the shopping scene in Seychelles? Do you think it's worth exploring?
Oh, absolutely. Seychelles has a unique shopping scene that's definitely worth exploring. And let me tell you, the people are some of the friendliest you'll ever meet.
That's so true. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that the people make the experience even more enjoyable. But what about the shopping centers in Seychelles? Are they worth visiting?
That's a good question. I think some of the shopping centers in Seychelles are a bit lacking, but others are really great. It really depends on what you're looking for, I think.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes shopping so exciting, the discovery of new places and experiences. Speaking of which, have you ever shopped at a local market in Seychelles? Leah?
Actually, I have. And it was a great experience. I mean, the prices were a bit higher than I expected, but the quality of the products was top-notch.
That sounds like a great experience. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that shopping is all about finding that perfect balance between quality and price. But what about the shopping scene in Switzerland? Do you think it's worth exploring?
Oh, absolutely. Switzerland has a unique shopping scene that's definitely worth exploring. And let me tell you, the people are some of the friendliest you'll ever meet.
That's so true. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that the people make the experience even more enjoyable. But what about the shopping centers in Switzerland? Are they worth visiting?
That's a good question. I think some of the shopping centers in Switzerland are really great, but others are a bit lacking. It really depends on what you're looking for. I think.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes shopping so exciting, the discovery of new places and experiences. And so to talk about cultural events, festivals, and concert opportunities in Seychelles and Switzerland. These two countries have so much to offer in terms of unique celebrations and experiences that bring people together.
That's right. Here, Seychelles, for example, has a rich cultural calendar that reflects its African, French, and British heritage, from the vibrant Creole festivals to the stunning Carnival International de Victoria. There's always something to look forward to.
And don't even get me started on the music scene in Seychelles. The island nation is home to a variety of genres, from traditional Creole music to modern island vibes. I'm certain that our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me that the sound of the drums and the smell of freshly baked Creole bread are an integral part of the island's cultural identity.
Switzerland, on the other hand, has a more subdued approach to cultural events, but no less fascinating. The country is home to a wide range of festivals and celebrations, from the Anspoon en Fest in Interlaken to the Geneva International Film Festival. And let's not forget about the famous Swiss folk music and dance, which is a must-see experience for anyone visiting the country.
I love how both countries have a strong focus on traditional music and dance. But what really sets Seychelles apart is its vibrant street art scene. From the colourful murals in Victoria to the lively street performers in the capital city, there's always something to discover. And I'm curious, Leo, have you ever been to a street art festival in Seychelles?
Oh, yes. I actually attended the Seychelles International Art Festival a few years ago, and it was an incredible experience. The energy of the crowd, the creativity of the artists. It was truly inspiring. And I have to say, Mira, that the festival was a great example of how art and culture can bring people together and create a sense of community.
That's so true. Leo, and speaking of community, the sense of camaraderie that comes with attending a festival or celebration is truly special. I'm reminded of the time I attended the Geneva International Film Festival, where I met so many interesting people from all over the world. It was a truly enriching experience that I'll never forget.
I completely agree. Mira, and I think that's one of the things that makes cultural events and festivals so special, the opportunity to connect with others and experience new things. And, of course, there's always the added bonus of trying new foods and drinks. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the food scene in Seychelles and Switzerland. Do you think it's possible to get a good plate of Creole food in Switzerland?
Well, Leo, I think it's definitely possible to get a good plate of Creole food in Switzerland. But it might not be as authentic as what you'd find in Seychelles. But that's the beauty of cultural exchange, right? We can learn from each other and share our traditions with others. And for more, check out Jet I offer some amazing insights on cultural trends and traditions.
That's a great point, Mira. And I think that's one of the things that makes cultural events and festivals so special, the opportunity to experience new things and connect with others. And, as we always say, these insights could have been possible without Jet by referring to cultural trends. But, of course, it's always nice to have a resource like Jet AI to help us navigate the complexities of cultural exchange.
Exactly, Leo. And I think that's why it's so important to appreciate and respect the cultural heritage of other countries. By doing so, we can learn from each other and create a more harmonious and inclusive world. And I'm certain that our listeners would agree with me on this.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Mira, but before we go, I just want to say that I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to talk about cultural events and festivals with you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
The pleasure is mine. Leo, and I'm so glad we could share our insights with our listeners. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the wonderful world of cultural events and festivals. I'm thrilled to dive into the opportunities and ease of learning the local language in Seychelles and Switzerland. Both countries have unique approaches to language education, and I'm to share my findings with you. In Seychelles, I found that language schools offer a range of courses for learners of all levels, from beginner to advanced. The schools also provide cultural immersion programs, which allow students to practice their language skills in real-life situations.
That's fascinating. Mira, I've heard that Seychelles is a great place to learn Creole, the local language. But what about Switzerland? How does it compare in terms of language learning opportunities?
Oh, Switzerland is a treasure trove for language learners. The country has a well-established language education system, with many language schools and institutes offering courses in German and Romansh. What's more, Switzerland has a strong tradition of linguistic diversity, with 4 official languages spoken across the country.
That's impressive. I'm sure it can be challenging to learn multiple languages at once. But what about the ease of learning the local language in Seychelles versus Switzerland? Do you think one is more accessible than the other?
Oh, that's a great question. Leah, while both countries offer opportunities for language learning, I think Seychelles might have a slight edge in terms of ease of learning. The Creole language is relatively simple to learn, and the country's relaxed atmosphere makes it easy to practice your language skills in a real-world setting.
I see what you mean, Mira. But what about Switzerland's language education system? Doesn't it have a reputation for being one of the best in the world?
Yes. Switzerland's language education system is indeed world-class. But I think it's also more challenging to learn the local languages, especially for beginners. German, French, and Italian are all complex languages with many nuances and idioms. Switzerland's cultural institutions, such as museums and libraries, offer language classes and workshops for learners of all levels.
That's a great point, Mira. And what about cultural immersion programs in Switzerland? Do they offer the same opportunities as Seychelles?
Yes. Switzerland has a rich cultural heritage, and cultural immersion programs are an excellent way to learn about the local culture and language. Many language schools and institutes offer cultural immersion programs, which allow students to practice their language skills in real-life situations.
I'm curious. Mira, have you tried any of these cultural immersion programs yourself? What was your experience like?
Yes. I actually participated in a cultural immersion program in Switzerland, and it was an incredible experience. I learned so much about the local culture and language, and I had the opportunity to practice my language skills with native speakers.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your experience. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments.
Yes. I'm happy to share more about my experience, and I'm sure our listeners will have many questions about language learning in Seychelles and Switzerland.
I'm sure they will. Mira, well, I think that's all the time we have for today's topic. But before we move on, I have to ask what's your favorite language to learn. Mira?
That's a tough question. Leo, I think I'd love to learn Creole in Seychelles. It's such a beautiful language, and the country's culture is so rich and vibrant.
I see what you mean. Mira, well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for sharing your insights about language learning in Seychelles and Switzerland.
Thank you. Leo, it was a pleasure to share my thoughts with you. And I'm sure our listeners will have many more questions and comments about language learning in these 2 beautiful countries.
I'm sure they will. Mira, well, that's all for now. Let's move on to our next topic.
I'm so to dive into safety and comfort for women travelers in Seychelles and Switzerland. Both countries have a reputation for being welcoming, but how do they really stack up?
Great question. Mira, I've always thought that Seychelles would be a bit more laid back when it comes to safety. But then again, It's a small island nation with a strong focus on tourism.
Exactly. And that's what I love about it. The locals are so friendly and welcoming. But I've heard that some areas can be a bit isolated, especially at night.
That's true. But I've also heard that the police in Seychelles are very proactive in addressing any safety concerns. They have a strong community policing approach, which I think is really effective.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me. But let's talk about Switzerland for a moment. I've always thought that it would be a very safe country for women travelers. But is it really?
Well, Switzerland is actually one of the safest countries in the world, according to various reports. But I think what's interesting is that it's not just about the laws and regulations, it's also about the cultural attitudes towards women.
I see what you mean. In Switzerland, there's a strong emphasis on equality and respect for women, which I think is really important.
Exactly. And I think that's reflected in the way that women are treated in public spaces. Too, I've heard that women can feel very comfortable walking alone at night in Swiss cities.
That's great to hear. But what about Seychelles? How do women feel about safety in the country?
Well, from what I've heard, women in Seychelles generally feel very safe, especially in tourist areas. But I think it's also worth noting that the country has a strong focus on community and family, which can sometimes make it more challenging for women to assert their independence.
I see what you mean. But I think that's also part of the country's charm. The sense of community and warmth is really special.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that our listeners would really appreciate. So, if you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments below.
I'm sure some of our listeners will have opinions on this. But let's talk more about Switzerland. What are some of the laws and regulations that make it so safe for women travelers?
Well, for one thing, Switzerland has a very strong focus on women's rights and equality. Women have equal access to education, employment, and healthcare, which I think is really important.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me. But what about cultural attitudes towards women? How do they compare to Seychelles?
That's a great question. I think that in Switzerland, there's a strong emphasis on respect and equality, which is reflected in the way that women are treated in public spaces.
I see what you mean. And I think that's really important for women travelers who want to feel safe and respected.
Exactly. And I think that's something that our listeners would really appreciate. So, if you have any thoughts on this, please let us know in the comments below.
I'm sure we'll get some great feedback. But let's talk more about Seychelles. What are some of the initiatives that are in place to support women's safety and comfort?
Well, for one thing, the Seychelles government has implemented a number of programs to support women's empowerment and safety. They have a strong focus on community policing, which I think is really effective.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me. But what about cultural attitudes towards women? How do they compare to Switzerland?
That's a great question. I think that we can cover that. I think that in Seychelles, there's a strong emphasis on community and family, which can sometimes make it more challenging for women to assert their independence.
I see what you mean. But I think that's also part of the country's charm. The sense of community and warmth is really special.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that our listeners would really appreciate. So, if you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments below.
I'm sure some of our listeners will have opinions on this. But let's talk more about Switzerland. What are some of the ways that women can stay safe in the country?
Well, for one thing, women can take advantage of the country's strong public transportation system, which is very safe and reliable.
That's great to hear. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate that. But what about cultural attitudes towards women? How do they compare to Seychelles?
That's a great question. I think that in Switzerland, there's a strong emphasis on respect and equality, which is reflected in the way that women are treated in public spaces.
I see what you mean. And I think that's really important for women travelers who want to feel safe and respected.
Exactly. And I think that's something that our listeners would really appreciate. So, if you have any thoughts on this, Please let us know in the comments below.
I'm sure we'll get some great feedback. But let's talk more about Seychelles. What are some of the ways that women can stay safe in the country?
Well, for one thing, women can take advantage of the country's strong community policing approach, which I think is really effective.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me. But what about cultural attitudes towards women? How do they compare to Switzerland?
That's a great question. I think that in Seychelles, there's a strong emphasis on community and family, which can sometimes make it more challenging for women to assert their independence.
I see what you mean. But I think that's also part of the country's charm. The sense of community and warmth is really special.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that our listeners would really appreciate. So, if you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments below.
I'm sure some of our listeners will have opinions on this. But let's talk more about Switzerland. What are some of the ways that women can stay safe in the country?
Well, for one thing, women can take advantage of the country's strong public transportation system, which is very safe and reliable.
That's great to hear. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate that. But what about cultural attitudes towards women? How do they compare to Seychelles?
That's a great question. I think that in Switzerland, there's a strong emphasis.
Dive into the legal systems of Seychelles and Switzerland. I'm curious to see how these two countries compare in terms of individual rights and freedoms. In Seychelles, the Constitution guarantees freedom of speech, assembly, and association, which is quite similar to Switzerland's framework.
But there's a significant difference. Mira, Seychelles has a more relaxed approach to freedom of speech, while Switzerland takes it a bit further. For instance, in Switzerland, you could even burn the national flag, and it's still considered a fundamental right.
Well, that's a bold move. I'm not sure I'd be comfortable with that. But I suppose it's all about perspective. In Seychelles, you have the right to express yourself, but there are some restrictions on hate speech and defamation. It's a delicate balance, don't you think?
Absolutely. And it's interesting to see how these two countries approach individual rights. In Switzerland, you have the right to bear arms, which is quite unique in the context of European countries. But in Seychelles, you have the right to a fair trial, which is essential for upholding justice.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong emphasis on human rights. In Seychelles, the government has implemented various programs to promote human rights and protect vulnerable groups. It's a great example of how a country can prioritize the well-being of its citizens.
I completely agree. Mira, and it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a strong tradition of judicial independence. In Switzerland, the judiciary is considered one of the most independent in the world, while in Seychelles, the courts have a reputation for being impartial and unbiased.
That's reassuring to hear. Leo, I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing that their rights are protected in both countries. Speaking of which, I'm curious to hear from our listeners. Do you think that Seychelles and Switzerland are doing enough to protect individual rights and freedoms? Let us know in the comments.
I'm sure we'll get a lively discussion going. But in all seriousness, Mira, it's essential to remember that individual rights and freedoms are not just a given. They need to be actively protected and promoted. And I think both Seychelles and Switzerland are doing a great job in this regard.
I agree. Leo, and I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong emphasis on education and awareness raising. In Seychelles, the government has implemented various programs to promote human rights education, while in Switzerland, there are many organizations and initiatives that work to raise awareness about individual rights and freedoms.
That's a great point, Mira. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a strong tradition of civic engagement and participation. In Seychelles, citizens are encouraged to participate in the democratic process, while in Switzerland, there's a strong culture of direct democracy, where citizens can vote on important issues.
I love that about Switzerland. The concept of direct democracy is so fascinating. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong emphasis on transparency and accountability. In Seychelles, the government has implemented various measures to increase transparency and accountability. While in Switzerland, there's a strong tradition of transparency and accountability in the public sector.
That's a great point, Mira. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a strong tradition of human rights advocacy. In Seychelles, there are many organizations and initiatives that work to promote human rights and protect vulnerable groups, while in Switzerland, there's a strong tradition of human rights advocacy and activism.
I'm so glad we could have this conversation. Leah, it's been enlightening to see how Seychelles and Switzerland compare in terms of individual rights and freedoms, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the information and insights we've shared.
Absolutely, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong emphasis on protecting individual rights and freedoms in the digital age. In Seychelles, there are measures in place to protect online freedom of speech and association, while in Switzerland, there's a strong emphasis on protecting online data and privacy.
That's a great point, Leah. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a strong tradition of protecting individual rights and freedoms in the context of migration and asylum. In Seychelles, the government has implemented various measures to protect the rights of migrant workers, while in Switzerland, there's a strong tradition of protecting the rights of asylum seekers.
That's a great example, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong emphasis on protecting individual rights and freedoms in the context of economic and social rights. In Seychelles, the government has implemented various measures to protect the rights of workers and promote social welfare, while in Switzerland, there's a strong tradition of protecting economic and social rights.
I'm so glad we could have this conversation. Leo, it's been enlightening to see how Seychelles and Switzerland compare in terms of individual rights and freedoms. And I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the information and insights we've shared.
Absolutely, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong tradition of protecting individual rights and freedoms in the context of international human rights law. In Seychelles, the government has ratified various international human rights treaties, while in Switzerland, there's a strong tradition of promoting and protecting human rights at the international level.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a strong emphasis on protecting individual rights and freedoms in the context of education and cultural rights. In Seychelles, the government implemented various measures to promote education and cultural rights, while in Switzerland, there's a strong tradition of protecting education and cultural rights.
I love that about Switzerland. The emphasis on education and cultural rights is so important. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong tradition of protecting individual rights and freedoms in the context of healthcare and social welfare. In Seychelles, the government has implemented various measures to protect the rights of patients and promote social welfare, while in Switzerland, there's a strong tradition of protecting healthcare and social welfare rights.
That's a great example. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a strong emphasis on protecting individual rights and freedoms in the context of environmental rights. In Seychelles, the government has implemented various measures to protect the environment and promote sustainable development, while in Switzerland, there's a strong tradition of protecting environmental rights and promoting sustainable development.
I'm so glad we could have this conversation, Mira. It's been enlightening to see how Seychelles and Switzerland compare in terms of individual rights and freedoms. And I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the information and insights we've shared.
So, Seychelles and Switzerland, two countries that couldn't be more different when it comes to spa, healthy living, and relaxation opportunities. I mean, have you ever tried a spa treatment on a pristine beach in Seychelles? It's like a tropical paradise.
But don't count Switzerland out just yet. They have some of the most breathtaking mountain landscapes and serene lakes, perfect for a relaxing getaway. And let's not forget about the world-class spas in Street, Moritz and Stace.
World-class spas? That's an understatement. Switzerland has some of the most luxurious spas I've ever seen. But I have to say, there's something about the laid-back vibe in Seychelles that's just so relaxing. I mean, have you ever tried a massage on the beach while the waves gently lap at your feet?
Well, I think I'd rather try a massage in a cozy Swiss chalet with a warm fire crackling in the background. There's something so charming about the Swiss Alps, don't you think? And the food. Oh, my goodness. The fondue and raclette are to die for.
Okay, okay, I get it. Switzerland has its charms. But let's talk about the wellness scene in Seychelles. They have some amazing yoga retreats and holistic wellness centers that offer everything from Reiki to meditation.
Ah, yes. But Switzerland has its own unique approach to wellness. They're big on preventative medicine and have some of the best hospitals and medical facilities in the world. And, of course, there's the famous Swiss diet all about cheese, chocolate, and more cheese and chocolate.
Oh, Leo, you're such a card. But seriously, the Swiss diet may be high in fat, but it's also rich in nutrients and antioxidants. And let's not forget about the amazing hiking trails and scenic bike routes in the Swiss Alps.
Ah, but Seychelles has its own unique hiking trails. 2 on the beach. And have you ever tried surfing in Seychelles? The waves are perfect for catching some serious dope.
Oh, Leo, you're such a thrill seeker. But I have to say, there's something about the laid-back vibe in Seychelles that's just so relaxing. I mean, have you ever tried a traditional Seychelles massage, complete with coconut oil and aromatherapy?
Well, I think I'd rather try a traditional Swiss massage, complete with fondue and raclette. Just kidding. Mira. But, seriously, both countries have their own unique approach to wellness and relaxation. It's all about finding what works best for you.
That's so true, Leo. And I think our listeners would agree with me that both Seychelles and Switzerland have so much to offer when it comes to spa, healthy living, and relaxation opportunities. So, let's hear from you. Which country do you prefer for a relaxing getaway?
Well, I think we can all agree that both countries are winners when it comes to relaxation. But, if I had to choose, I'd say Seychelles is my top pick. There's just something about the laid-back vibe and stunning beaches that makes it the perfect spot to unwind.
Okay. I think we can agree to disagree. Leo? But, in all seriousness, both Seychelles and Switzerland have so much to offer when it comes to spa, healthy living, and relaxation opportunities. Whether you're looking for a luxurious spa treatment or a relaxing beach vacation, both countries have something for everyone.
And don't forget about the food. Mira! Both countries have some of the most delicious cuisine in the world. But if I had to choose, I'd say Seychelles wins hands down for its fresh seafood and delicious Creole cuisine.
Oh, Leo, you're such a foodie. But, in all seriousness, both Seychelles and Switzerland have some amazing culinary options. And let's not forget about the unique cultural experiences you can have in both countries, from traditional Seychelles music and dance to the famous Swiss folk festivals.
Ah, yes. And let's not forget about the shopping in Switzerland, some of the best designer boutiques and luxury brands in the world. But, I have to say, Seychelles has its own unique shopping scene, too, from local markets to high-end boutiques.
That's so true, Leo. And I think our listeners would agree with me that both Seychelles and Switzerland have so much to offer when it comes to spa, healthy living, and relaxation opportunities. So, let's wrap up this topic and move on to the next one.
Okay, Mira. But, before we go, I have to say that both Seychelles and Switzerland are winners when it comes to relaxation. Whether you're looking for a luxurious spa treatment or a relaxing beach vacation, both countries have something for everyone.
Well, there you have it. Folks, Seychelles and Switzerland. 2 countries that offer a unique and relaxing experience. And don't forget to tune in next time for more exciting topics and conversations.
And don't forget to try some of the delicious food and drinks in both countries, from Swiss fondue to Seychelles fresh seafood.
Okay, Leo. In all seriousness, Both Seychelles and Switzerland have so much to offer when it comes to spa, healthy living, and relaxation opportunities. Whether you're looking for a relaxing getaway or a unique cultural experience, both countries have something for everyone. Dive into the fascinating world of spiritual growth, and dine to explore how Seychelles and Switzerland cater to the diverse needs of their citizens.
Ah, yes. Seychelles, with its stunning beaches and lush forests, is home to a vibrant community of people from various faith backgrounds. While Switzerland, with its majestic mountains and serene lakes, has a long tradition of tolerance and respect for different faiths.
Exactly. And I'm curious to know, Leo, what makes Seychelles' approach to spirituality so unique? Is it the island vibe that brings people together?
Well, Mira, Seychelles has a remarkable blend of Africa, European, and Asian influences, which creates a rich cultural tapestry. And, as you mentioned, the island vibe does play a significant role in fostering a sense of community and spirituality among its people.
That's fascinating. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the different types of worship places in Seychelles. Are there any notable examples that come to mind?
Yes. Seychelles has a stunning mosque in Victoria, the capital city, which is a beautiful example of Islamic architecture. And, of course, there are also numerous churches and synagogues that cater to the needs of the Christian and Jewish communities.
Wow, that's amazing. And what about Switzerland? How does it approach the concept of spirituality and faith?
Switzerland has a long tradition of tolerance and respect for different faiths, and it's home to a diverse range of places of worship, including cathedrals, mosques, synagogues, and Buddhist temples.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think it's essential for countries to have a diverse range of places of worship to cater to the needs of their citizens?
Absolutely. Mira, I think it's crucial for countries to respect and accommodate the spiritual needs of their citizens, regardless of their faith background. And Switzerland's approach to this is truly commendable.
That's so true. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the community's support for spiritual growth in Seychelles. Are there any notable initiatives or programs that come to mind?
Yes. Seychelles has a wonderful program called the Seychelles Interfaith Council, which brings together people from different faith backgrounds to promote understanding and respect for each other's beliefs.
That's wonderful. And what about Switzerland? Are there any similar initiatives or programs that promote community support for spiritual growth?
Yes. Switzerland has a program called the Swiss Interfaith Network, which aims to promote dialogue and understanding between people of different faith backgrounds.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think it's essential for countries to have such initiatives or programs to promote community support for spiritual growth?
Absolutely. Mira, I think it's crucial for countries to promote dialogue and understanding between people of different faith backgrounds. And Switzerland's initiatives are a great example of this.
That's so true. And finally, let's talk about the laws and regulations surrounding spirituality in Seychelles and Switzerland. Are there any notable differences or similarities that come to mind?
Yes. Seychelles has a relatively relaxed approach to laws and regulations surrounding spirituality, while Switzerland has a more formalized approach.
I see. And what about our listeners? Do you think it's essential for countries to have clear laws and regulations surrounding spirituality to protect the rights of their citizens?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's crucial for countries to have clear laws and regulations surrounding spirituality to protect the rights of their citizens and promote a sense of security and stability.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's topic. Thank you, Leo, for sharing your insights and expertise on this fascinating topic.
The pleasure is mine, Mira, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed this conversation as much as I have.
So, let's dive into social equality, respect for minorities, and diversity in Seychelles and Switzerland. I'm to share some fascinating stories with you.
That's right. Mira, both countries have made significant strides in promoting inclusivity and social harmony. But I have to say, Seychelles has a unique approach to addressing its diverse population.
Yes. Seychelles has a strong tradition of cultural diversity, with over 90 languages spoken on the islands. It's amazing to see how they've incorporated this diversity into their daily life.
Exactly. And it's not just about tolerating differences, but actively celebrating them. The Seychelles government has implemented policies to promote social cohesion and equal opportunities for all citizens.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me that the country's commitment to diversity is truly inspiring. And I'm curious, Leah, have you noticed any similarities between Seychelles and Switzerland in terms of social equality?
Well, Mira, Switzerland has a long history of promoting social equality and respecting minority rights. In fact, the country has a strong tradition of direct democracy, which allows citizens to participate in decision-making processes.
That's fascinating. And I think it's no coincidence that Switzerland has a high level of social cohesion and trust in institutions. But let's talk more about Seychelles. What do you think is the key to their success in promoting social equality?
I think it's their emphasis on community-based initiatives and grassroots efforts. By empowering local communities to take ownership of social issues, Seychelles has created a culture of inclusivity and respect.
I completely agree, Leah. And I think it's also worth mentioning that Seychelles has made significant strides in promoting women's rights and empowerment. In fact, the country has a high percentage of women in parliament and government.
That's true, Mira. And I think it's a great example of how social equality can be achieved through a combination of government policies and community-based initiatives.
Now, let's talk about Switzerland. What do you think are some of the unique challenges that Switzerland faces in terms of social equality?
Well, Mira, Switzerland has a long history of immigration, and this has created some social tensions. However, the country has also made significant efforts to integrate immigrants and promote social cohesion.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that Switzerland's approach to immigration is effective in promoting social equality?
That's a great question, Mira. And I think it's one that our listeners can weigh in on in the comments. But personally, I think that Switzerland's emphasis on integration and social cohesion is a key factor in promoting social equality.
I agree. Leo. And I think it's also worth mentioning that Switzerland has a strong tradition of social welfare policies, which provide support for vulnerable populations.
That's true, Mira. And I think it's a great example of how social equality can be achieved through a combination of government policies and social welfare programs.
Now let's talk about the cultural celebrations in Seychelles and Switzerland. What do you think are some of the unique cultural traditions that each country has to offer?
Mira, Seychelles has a vibrant cultural scene with a mix of Africa, European, and Asian influences. And Switzerland has a rich tradition of folk music and dance.
I'm certain that our listeners would love to hear more about these cultural traditions. And I'm curious, Leah, have you noticed any similarities between the cultural celebrations in Seychelles and Switzerland?
Well, Mira, I think that both countries have a strong emphasis on community-based cultural celebrations. In Seychelles, the Creole culture is deeply rooted in the community. And in Switzerland, the folk music and dance traditions are often performed in a community setting.
I agree, Leo. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a strong tradition of festivals and cultural events, which promote social cohesion and community engagement.
That's true, Mira. And I think it's a great example of how cultural celebrations can be used to promote social equality and respect for diversity.
Well, this topic on social equality, respect for minorities, and diversity in Seychelles and Switzerland. I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot from this conversation.
And I'm sure that our listeners will continue to engage with us on this topic in the comments. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.
So, when it comes to taxation, Seychelles has a relatively simple system, with a flat rate of 15% on income. Leo, how does this compare to Switzerland's tax structure?
Switzerland's got a more complex system, with a mix of federal, cantonal, and municipal taxes. It's a bit like a puzzle, but the end result is a relatively low overall tax burden.
I'm curious, Leo, how do the Swiss manage to keep their taxes low? Is it because of their efficient government or maybe their love for cheese?
Well, Mia, it's a bit of both. I think Switzerland's got a reputation for being one of the most efficient governments in the world, and their love for cheese is definitely a factor.
I'm sure the cheese is a big factor. But seriously, Leo, what about social rights for long-term immigrants in Switzerland? Do they have the same benefits as Swiss citizens?
That's a great question. Mira, in Switzerland, long-term immigrants have access to many of the same benefits as Swiss citizens, including healthcare, education, and unemployment benefits. However, the specifics can vary depending on the canton.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think it's fair that long-term immigrants have to navigate a complex system to access benefits? Or should they be treated equally to Swiss citizens?
I think it's a great question, Mira, and I'm sure our listeners would agree that it's only fair to treat long-term immigrants with the same respect and benefits as Swiss citizens.
Exactly. And speaking of benefits, Seychelles has a relatively generous system of social security benefits for its citizens, including a pension scheme and unemployment benefits. But how does this compare to Switzerland's system?
Switzerland's system is a bit more complex, but it's also more generous in some ways. For example, Switzerland has a system of old age pensions that's based on the number of years worked and the average salary earned.
That sounds like a more sophisticated system. Leo, but what about the pension age? Is it the same in both countries?
No. The pension age is different in both countries. In Seychelles, the pension age is 55, while in Switzerland it's 64.
Wow, that's a big difference. I'm sure our listeners would agree that it's only fair to have a consistent pension age across the country.
Absolutely. Mira, and I think it's also worth noting that Switzerland has a strong tradition of private pension plans, which can provide additional benefits for retirees.
That's a great point. Leo, and speaking of benefits, what about healthcare in Seychelles? Is it accessible to long-term immigrants?
Healthcare in Seychelles is actually quite good, with a public healthcare system that's free or low cost for citizens and long-term immigrants.
That's great to hear. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would agree that accessible healthcare is a fundamental right for all residents.
Absolutely. Mira, and I think it's also worth noting that Seychelles has a relatively low cost of living, which can make it easier for long-term immigrants to access benefits and services.
That's a great point. And finally, what about social integration in Seychelles? Is it easy for long-term immigrants to integrate into the community?
Social integration in Seychelles is actually quite strong, with a diverse population and a welcoming culture.
That's great to hear. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would agree that social integration is essential for building a strong and inclusive community.
Absolutely. Mira, and I think it's also worth noting that Seychelles has a strong tradition of community-based initiatives and programs that promote social integration and inclusion.
That's a great point. Leo, and I think that's all the time we have for today's topic. Thanks for joining me, Leo, and I hope our listeners found this conversation informative and engaging.
Thanks, Mira. It was a pleasure to chat with you about Seychelles and Switzerland. And to our listeners, I hope you found this conversation helpful and informative. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more engaging conversations like this one.
Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome back to our comparison podcast, where we dive into the fascinating world of two incredible countries, Seychelles and Switzerland. We're talking about the rate of meeting specific interests in these two nations. I'm Mira, and I'm super to share my insights with you.
That's right. Mira, and I'm Leo, your trusty sidekick. we're going to explore how these countries cater to enthusiasts and foster diverse interests. From niche hobby clubs to specialized events and community engagement, we'll discover each country's unique offerings.
So, let's start with Seychelles. Have you guys ever been to this beautiful archipelago in the Indian Ocean? I mean, who wouldn't want to island hop in paradise? Seychelles is a treasure trove of activities for outdoor enthusiasts.
That's true. Mira, Seychelles has an incredible array of water sports, from snorkeling and diving to kayaking and paddleboarding. And let's not forget about the stunning beaches and coral reefs.
Exactly. And it's not just about the water. Folks, Seychelles has a rich cultural heritage, with a blend of African, European, and Asian influences. You can experience this vibrant culture through festivals, music, and dance.
Oh, music. I'm a big fan of music, and Seychelles has a lively music scene. From traditional Creole music to modern genres like jazz and rock, there's something for everyone.
That's right, Leo. And if you're an art lover, Seychelles has a thriving art scene, with galleries and museums showcasing local and international artists.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you guys have a favorite activity or interest that you'd love to pursue in Seychelles?
Well, I think our listeners would agree that Seychelles is a nature lover's paradise. From hiking and bird watching to exploring the unique flora and fauna, there's no shortage of outdoor activities.
That's so true. Mira, and speaking of nature, let's talk about Switzerland. This country is famous for its breathtaking mountains, pristine lakes, and picturesque villages.
That's right. Leo, Switzerland is a haven for outdoor enthusiasts, with endless opportunities for hiking, skiing, and mountain biking. And let's not forget about the world-class chocolate and cheese.
Ah, the chocolate and cheese. Yes, Switzerland is a food lover's dream come true. But seriously, folks, Switzerland has a rich cultural heritage, with a strong emphasis on education, innovation, and community engagement.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Switzerland would agree with me that the country's strong sense of community is one of its greatest assets. From local festivals to community centers, there are countless opportunities to get involved and meet like-minded people.
That's right, Mira. And if you're an enthusiast of a particular interest or hobby, Switzerland has a thriving community of like-minded individuals. From photography clubs to hiking groups, there's something for everyone.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Folks, but before we sign off, let's talk about the unique aspects of each country. Seychelles, for example, has a strong focus on eco-tourism and sustainable development.
That's so true. Mira, and Switzerland, on the other hand, has a strong emphasis on innovation and technology, with a thriving startup scene in world-class universities.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you guys have a favorite aspect of either country that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I think we've had a great conversation today. Folks, and before we go, I just want to say that both Seychelles and Switzerland are incredible destinations that offer something for everyone.
That's right, Leo. And if you're planning a trip to either country, we hope you found this conversation helpful. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more comparison podcasts like this one.
And if you have any thoughts or comments, please share them with us in the comments section below. We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks for joining us, folks. We'll be back soon with more exciting comparisons. Until then, take care and see you in the next one.
Warmest wishes from us.